Chapter 6:12. Turning his head back, Han Shuo glanced at Lisa and saw that her eyes were filled with incredulous surprise. However, when Lisa saw Han Shuo turn his head back, the surprise on her face suddenly turned to confusion. Her slender brows furrowed slightly as she warily sized up Han Shuo, who had changed his appearance. Lisa had grown up. This was the first impression that Han Shuo had when he turned his head back to look at her. The unruly and willful little girl from back then had now grown into a slender, elegant, and graceful young lady. The tragedy that had befallen her family had made her much more mature and taught her to be strong and diligent. Looking at Lisa in front of him, Han Shuo's thoughts involuntarily returned to the past. He recalled the embarrassing time when he had first arrived in this world and pretended to be a ghost to scare Lisa. He recalled how Lisa had used him for necromancy magic experiments, and the trace of a smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Lisa, who had been looking suspiciously at Han Shuo, suddenly had her eyes light up. She said excitedly, "Brian, is that you?" "It's not me," Han Shuo answered reflexively without a second thought. Han Shuo immediately realized that the words were inappropriate as soon as they left his mouth. He shook his head with a wry smile. Surprise flashed through her eyes and was soon replaced by sadness. Lisa just stared blankly at Han Shuo, her gaze stubborn and resentful. Tears had filled her eyes at some point, as if they would fall at any moment. Sigh. Han Shuo sighed softly as they looked at each other for a few seconds. He smiled wryly. "How did you recognize me?" When Han Shuo's words left his mouth, the tears that had been swirling in Lisa's eyes finally rolled down her smooth cheeks. The moment her eyeballs rolled down, the stubborn Lisa suddenly softened. She burst into tears and rushed into Han Shuo's arms in a split second. She used all the strength in her body to hug Han Shuo tightly, as if she was deathly afraid that Han Shuo would disappear from her sight. "You're back. You're finally back. Do you know how worried I was? When I heard that you were killed by the Church of Light, do you know how much pain I felt in my heart?" Lisa said in a choked voice as she hugged Han Shuo tightly. She appeared very helpless and desolate. Lisa's body trembled in his arms. Han Shuo's heart softened as he listened to her emotional cries. From her words, Han Shuo could hear the deep feelings Lisa had for him. It was a kind of unswerving conviction that he could not do without. "Why are you doing this?" Sighing softly, Han Shuo's heart was filled with sourness. He really did not understand why Lisa was so insistent. All this while, Han Shuo had thought that Lisa's feelings for him were just youthful fooling around that would naturally be forgotten with the passage of time. He really did not expect Lisa to have such deep feelings for him. "Only when I'm with you can I feel happy. Apart from you, no one else can give me that kind of feeling. Brian, I beg you, don't be so heartless, okay?" Lisa's eyes were filled with tears as she tightly grabbed onto Han Shuo's chest, helplessly pleading. "Ai." Sighing again, Han Shuo's heart softened. He completely forgot his promise to Phoebe and the others. Looking at Lisa's tearful appearance, he unconsciously nodded. An ecstatic expression suddenly blossomed on Lisa's tear-stained face. She fiercely hugged Han Shuo, hugging him tighter and tighter, as if she wanted to melt herself into Han Shuo's body. Sensing Lisa's all-out strength, Han Shuo seemed to feel the heaviness of Lisa's emotions. He moved his mouth close to Lisa's ear and said softly, all right, don't cry. If others see this, they'll think that I'm bullying you. You've always been bullying me, and for many years." Lisa could not hold back her emotions anymore after venting. She began to sob and complain in Han Shuo's chest, as if she wanted to release all the hidden bitterness that had been bottled up in her heart for many years at once. Han Shuo shook his head with a wry smile, no longer trying to persuade Lisa to stop crying. From her agitated emotions, Han Shuo knew that these words had been bottled up in her heart for more than a year or two. Now that she had finally found a chance, how could Lisa be willing to give it up? Han Shuo was clear in his heart that if she did not speak those words clearly, the words that had been bottled up in her heart would be harmful to her body and cultivation. Only by venting them all would she be able to completely walk out of the pain and regain a healthy and stable state of mind. Therefore, Han Shuo did not try to persuade her. He only lightly patted Lisa's fragrant shoulder and patiently listened to her tearful complaints mixed with hidden bitterness and depression. He did not interject a single word, quietly feeling Lisa's deep feelings for him that were as deep as the sea. After a long, long time, Lisa's bitter cries gradually stopped. After a while, when her delicate body no longer trembled, Han Shuo asked with some doubt, "How did you recognize me so quickly?" Glaring resentfully at Han Shuo, Lisa cutely wrinkled her nose. "When you had your back to me to size up your sculpture, you did not deliberately conceal your aura. I am all too familiar with you. Your back, your aura, and the naughtiness in your eyes. Your transformation may be able to deceive others, but not me," Lisa said with great confidence. Han Shua's heart was indescribably moved by her words. After so many years, Lisa was actually able to recognize him at a glance from his back. This was sufficient proof of how deep her feelings for him were. However, at the same time, Han Shuo was also on guard. He knew that because he had just entered the Nine Changes realm, his grasp of the transformations of the Nine Changes realm was not profound enough. Otherwise, Lisa would not have been able to recognize him so easily. "You don't look good like this. What's wrong?" Lisa panicked when she saw that Han Shuo was not speaking. She hastily asked, "Have you been disfigured by someone? How did you become so ugly?" Han Shuo smiled bitterly and shook his head. Under Lisa's gaze, the skin on Han Shuo's cheeks rippled like water. Before Lisa could cry out in surprise, Han Shuo had reverted to his original appearance. So miraculous. Lisa finally cried out in surprise. Her face was full of disbelief. With a faint smile, Han Shuo held Lisa's little hand and looked at Lisa, who had turned into a beautiful young lady. With a movement of his consciousness, he clearly sensed the strength of Lisa's mental strength. Then, he softly praised, "Not bad. I didn't expect you to become an adept magician. This kind of progress is truly astonishing." "Of course not. Compared to Master Fanny and the others, I'm still far behind." Lisa chuckled happily when she heard Han Shuo's praise. However, she did not show any arrogance. It seemed that she had indeed matured a lot. "They have more or less accepted my help. You have reached your current strength without borrowing any external help. It is truly amazing." Han Shuo shook his head and once again affirmed Lisa's hard work. The reason why Phoebe and the other two girls could improve so quickly was because of Han Shuo's help. Otherwise, even if the three girls had extraordinary aptitudes, they would not have been able to reach their current heights in such a short time. "Hee, that's because I'm afraid of being left far behind by you. I'm afraid that you will look down on me. However, it seems that no matter how hard I work, I will still not be able to catch up to you." Lisa rubbed her little nose in embarrassment and spoke her mind to Han Shuo. "Close your eyes and calm your mind," Han Shuo suddenly said softly as a thought occurred to him. Lisa trusted Han Shuo unreservedly. Although she did not know what Han Shuo was going to do, she still followed Han Shuo's instructions and closed her eyes. However, she could not calm her mind no matter what. She could not help but think of some places that she did not dare to think of. Han Shuo held Lisa's little hand as the two leaned lightly against each other. They could smell each other's scent. Lisa was no longer a little girl. She had an expression as vast as the ocean when she looked at Han Shuo. Her nose and mouth were filled with the manly scent of Han Shuo. Her heart became more and more chaotic, filled with both anticipation and nervousness. Han Shuo could not help but laugh when he sensed Lisa's chaotic state of mind and saw her flushed cheeks and rapid breathing. He lightly tapped her forehead with his finger and said amusedly, "What nonsense are you thinking about? I'm only preparing to pass on some of my insights regarding necromancy magic to you. I have no intention of doing anything bad to you." He understood that Han Shuo possessed extraordinary strength. Therefore, he didn't put on airs in front of Han Shuo and even got used to obeying Han Shuo's orders. "And don't worry. No matter who it is, anyone who dares to cause trouble will die," Han Shuo said confidently. Candide smiled sinisterly and didn't say anything else. Like a shadow in the darkness, he walked towards a bell tower and began to make arrangements. Expanding his consciousness, Han Shuo spied on all the important figures of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. The entire academy was like a miniature that was imprinted in his mind. Not a single area or person could escape his observation. This time, Fanny's inauguration ceremony had caused an uproar in the Lancelot Empire a few days ago. If there were people with ulterior motives who wanted to cause trouble, they would have long since received the news and made preparations. Although Han Shuo was confident in his own strength, he did not have that much confidence in others. A sneak attack often happened in the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint. Even if he was strong, he still had to be careful. Silently paying attention to the movements in every direction of the academy, Han Shuo communicated with Candide and arrived at Dean Emma's spacious secret room. He saw Fanny, who was listening to Emma's teachings. Fanny had been staying with Emma for the past few days. Emma explained to Fanny some of the mundane matters of the academy, as well as the things that she needed to pay attention to in every aspect. Fanny, who had always been apprehensive, seized the time to ask Emma for advice on how to manage the academy. She wanted to understand the areas that she needed to pay attention to as soon as possible. Previously, Fanny had buried herself in necromancy magic and her own training. She rarely paid attention to mundane matters, but now that she was about to accept the position of the new dean of the Babylon Academy, she naturally had to learn new knowledge. Otherwise, even if she had Han Shuo as her backer, she wouldn't be able to convince the masses if she didn't have the ability. How is it? Han Shuo asked with a smile after entering. Fanny is a very good child. Hehe, don't worry, I don't think there will be any problems. She will definitely be able to take good care of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. The grizzled-haired Emma looked benevolently at Han Shuo and said merrily, That's good. Dean Emma, you're not that old. Why are you in such a hurry to retire? Han Shuo was a bit puzzled. Logically speaking, Emma could indeed remain in her position for a few more years. I'm getting old, hehe. Look at me, I'm still a Grand Magus at my age, unable to break through. Fanny is already a Grand Magus necromancy at such a young age, and I think she'll advance even further soon. Emily and Phoebe are even more unbelievable. Hehe, since the children have all grown up, us old fellows should also give up our positions to the younger generation. Emma smiled and gently explained to Han Shuo, Thank you, Sir Dean. You've always taken good care of me all these years. Without you, things between me and Brian wouldn't have gone so smoothly. Fanny looked at Emma and sincerely thanked her. Thank you. Han Shuo also bowed respectfully to Emma and sincerely thanked her. Back then, when Han Shuo hadn't reached such a high realm, when Fanny's identity hadn't been exposed in the Empire, Han Shuo and Fanny had almost rashly gotten together. If it wasn't for Emma's dissuasion, the two of them would have been unable to escape the restrictions of some rigid rules by announcing their relationship so quickly. After all, the two of them were originally teacher and student, and this was against the laws of the Empire. It was precisely because of Emma's far-sighted persuasion that Han Shuo and Fanny had properly concealed this fact. When Han Shuo's reputation in the Empire had reached a great height and he'd helped Lawrence become the king of Lancelot Empire, no one dared to mention their teacher and student relationship due to their high status and powerful strength, and they naturally got together. No need to thank me. Hehe, I already knew that the two of you would get together. It's just that I've lived a few years longer than the two of you and can see things further than you can. Hehe, it's a good thing that the two of you listen to me. You're both good children, Emma said amiably to Han Shuo and Fanny. It's about time. Lawrence has also arrived. Fanny, you're the host today, so you should come out to meet everyone and prepare for the ceremony. Han Shuo first nodded to Emma and then said to Han Shuo, But there are still many things that I don't understand. I still need to continue asking Sir Dean. Fanny was clearly a bit nervous when faced with such an important matter. Hehe, although I'm no longer the dean, I will still remain in the residence. If you have any questions, it's not too late to ask them later. Silly girl, go. There's nothing to be afraid of, Emma said to Fanny, amused. The wrinkles on her face were all squeezed together, and she really did look a bit old. Dean Emma, take this pill and eat it. Hehe, perhaps you won't look so old after eating this pill. A thought occurred to Han Shuo, and he took out a rejuvenation pill that he'd refined recently and handed it to Emma. Han Shuo had all sorts of rare and strange ingredients on hand now. In order to help Lisa and his friends, Han Shuo spent some time refining several pills with different functions. The rejuvenation pill was a pill that cleared away the impurities in the body and revitalized the aging body and cells. Han Shuo saw that Emma's face was full of wrinkles and thought of how Emma had taken care of him and Fanny in the past. He was moved and gave her one. Emma seemed to know of Han Shuo's miracles and happily accepted the rejuvenation pill from Han Shuo. She held the rejuvenation pill in her hand and examined it with curiosity. She chuckled. A pill like this has such a miraculous effect? Smiling and nodding, Han Shuo said, "Try it. It's a pill that I personally refined. It should have some effect." "Hehe, I believe you. Candide has told me about your miracles. Anything you take out will certainly not be ordinary." Emma was very happy. Any woman would always wish to appear a bit younger, and Emma was naturally no exception. "You may sweat for a few days after taking this pill. The sweat will have some faint black stains, but don't worry, that's the removal of impurities from the body. It's a normal phenomenon." Han Shuo was afraid that Emma wouldn't understand the effects of the pill and would be shocked by its normal effects after taking it, so he explained it in advance. "Hehe, I know. I remember that Fanny also had diarrhea for 3 days in the past." Emma chuckled as she looked at Fanny and teased. As the dean, Emma was very concerned about the matters of the academy. Fanny had always stayed within the academy and had seen everything that had happened in the past few days. She'd been a bit worried at first and had even talked to Fanny. She then discovered that Fanny looked radiant after having diarrhea for 3 days, as if she'd been reborn. With Emma's experience, she naturally knew that something must have happened to Fanny. Hearing Emma's words, Fanny's face and ears flushed red. She glared at Han Shuo and chided. "What kind of pill is that? Why does it always have such embarrassing side effects?" "Oh, then forget it. I was going to give you a newly refined beauty pill, but since you're afraid of the side effects, then forget it." Han Shuo shrugged and feigned helplessness. Fanny's eyes suddenly lit up when she heard that it was a beauty pill. She hurriedly walked in front of Han Shuo and said excitedly, "Give it to me. I'll take it no matter what side effects it has." Han Shuo had known this would happen and laughed heartily as he held Fanny's arm. He winked proudly at Emma and led her outside. Did Brian really use undead creatures to exterminate the hundreds of thousands of beastmen warriors? Due to the close relationship between Emily and Fanny, Old Han of the Betteridge clan was on good terms with Firenze. He started to make a big fuss. As soon as Old Han asked this question, the heads of the surrounding families, the various ministers of the empire, and even King Lawrence all pricked up their ears and showed expressions of attentiveness. It seemed that everyone was interested in this topic. Motherf ***, believe it or not, it's up to you. You bunch of inexperienced people. What's there to fuss about? Even if I'm lying, don't tell me that so many soldiers and civilians of the South Border City are lying as well." Firenze rolled his eyes. This question had been asked to him by more than one person. "Well, the people are too good at spreading false information. We don't dare to believe everything they say." Old Han chuckled awkwardly. Then, his expression turned solemn. He stared at Firenze and asked again, "Are you telling the truth? Did that youngster really single-handedly use necromancy magic to exterminate hundreds of thousands of orc warriors?" Old Han knew that although Firenze had a fiery temper, he was definitely not someone who liked to spout nonsense. Especially when Firenze displayed his impatience, Old Han was even more certain that Firenze was telling the truth. This matter was truly unimaginable. Even Ermite Cotton, the founding hero of the Empire, did not have such a shocking battle record as Han Shuo. Hundreds of thousands of orc warriors. What kind of concept was that? To think that a single person could exterminate hundreds of thousands of orc warriors. No matter who it was, they would find it hard to believe this fact. "Believe it or not, I can't be bothered with you guys." Firenze snorted coldly. He shot a glance at Lawrence, who was eavesdropping at the side, and said in a loud voice, "Your Majesty, stop eavesdropping. When will the 2 legions you promised me arrive? I'm still waiting to conquer the Empire of Orcs." "Humph. The Empire of Orcs has been attacking the southern border for 3 years. It's time for us to act." Lawrence awkwardly smiled and assured Firenze, "Don't worry, The 2 legions will definitely arrive in a month's time. As for the southern border, you'll have to pay more attention to it. After that brat Brian's ruckus, the Empire of Orcs has been scared out of their wits. Now, his reputation is even more resounding than mine in the southern border. All the Orcs believe that he is a true homicidal maniac and no longer dare to cause trouble for the Empire. The southern border is now safe and sound. You don't have to worry anymore, said Firenze carelessly. He appeared very confident. Lawrence nodded with a smile and did not say anything else. His heart, however, was filled with astonishment. He had never expected that Han Shuo would actually be so terrifying. He had single-handedly scared the entire Empire of Orcs into not daring to come to Lancelot Empire. Firenze's confirmation of the South Border City incident had made Lawrence even more determined to treat Han Shuo well, regardless of any conditions. The eyes of the dignitaries of the Empire were filled with astonishment. They were still slowly recalling Firenze's words. Each and every one of them had made up their minds that they would never make an enemy out of Han Shuo. What do you want to talk about? It was at this moment that Han Shuo's gentle voice sounded. He walked over together with the calmly dressed Fanny. Fanny had put on some light makeup, which made her already gorgeous and alluring look even more beautiful. She wore a loose black magical robe, which made her look solemn and dignified. However, it did not seem to be able to completely conceal her graceful figure. A faint smile hung on her face. Her dignified and elegant temperament made everyone secretly nod their heads. For some reason, they felt that with her as the new dean of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, the future of the academy would be even brighter. Nothing, we were just wondering why you haven't arrived yet. Lawrence rushed to cover up for fear that Firenze would speak too quickly and reveal what they had just discussed. Lass, you are so beautiful today. Hee, you are as beautiful as your mother. Firenze looked at Fanny and smiled as he praised her. However, after saying those words, he seemed to recall something and sighed softly. His expression was somewhat dejected. Thank you for your praise, father. Today is a good day. Don't think about unhappy things. After such a long time, Fanny had long since forgiven Firenze's actions of disregarding his family for the sake of the country. She hurriedly said with a smile when she saw his expression turn gloomy. Firenze nodded his head and did not say anything else. However, his complexion looked a little better. As soon as Han Shuo and Fanny appeared, the nobles of the Empire came over to congratulate Fanny one by one. Their attitude was more sincere than the other. Han Shuo noticed that most of them were doing this for the sake of him and Firenze. All right, we can begin. Lawrence saw that Fanny had come over and nodded to the guards of honor standing in the distance. As soon as the guards of honor saw Lawrence nod, they started playing all kinds of musical instruments in unison. Amidst the cheerful and high-spirited music, teachers and students of various departments gathered in the distance. Emily and Phoebe also appeared out of nowhere. Dean Emma, Candide, Amis, and many other characters that Han Shuo was familiar with also appeared. Emma walked up to the rostrum. With a benevolent smile on her face, she began to narrate the glorious history of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. Fanny wore a solemn expression as she stood under Emma and listened to Emma's speech. Chapter 6:15. Let's not worry about where they are for now. The most important thing right now is to protect the pillars of the empire below. When Ermite Cotton saw Han Shuo's murderous look, he guessed that Han Shuo was preparing to immediately find the person who had released the forbidden light magic and kill them all. If Han Shuo immediately set out to search for the spellcaster, the forces protecting the plaza below would lack an important protective barrier like him. Judging from the power of the forbidden magic, Radiant Blast, it should have been set up by several experts of the Church of Light. Ermite Cotton didn't have the confidence to completely protect everyone below. Let's first block the power of the Radiant Blast, so that the people below won't suffer a calamity. With his reminder, Han Shuo immediately reacted and didn't rush to find the person from the Church of Light. It was strange. Han Shuo's consciousness covered a wide area. Logically speaking, he shouldn't have been unable to find traces of the person. However, when Han Shuo sensed the abnormality of the light element in the air above the plaza, he immediately focused his attention. wanting to find out where the perpetrator was. However, he really couldn't find the location of the person. This was somewhat illogical. What's going on? Why did the sunlight suddenly become so dazzling? It's making one dizzy and uncomfortable. I don't know why, but I feel very stifled in my heart. Could it be that a storm is coming? Below the plaza, a few nobles who didn't know what was going on used their hands to shield their eyes and look around. These people often didn't know martial arts or magic, but because of their high status, they still instinctively sensed that something was wrong. As for those experts who were skilled in martial arts and magic, they faintly sensed danger from the abnormality of the light element. However, because the one who had released the radiant blast was a top expert of the Church of Light, they couldn't tell what was wrong even though they sensed it. Something's not right. Although King Lawrence's martial arts was very poor, he also sensed danger from the stifling atmosphere around him. I don't know why, but the light element has suddenly become very active. Ames, one of the 3 heavyweights of the Dark Mantle, cultivated in the elemental energy of light and was already a light Grand Magus. His brows were tightly furrowed as he sensed some danger from the flow of the familiar light element. Your Majesty, there might be danger. Let us send you away first. Candide walked to Lawrence's side and proposed with a bow. Lifting his head to look at the dazzling sky, Lawrence hesitated for a moment and began to search for Han Shua's figure in the crowd. However, after making a circle, he discovered that Han Shua wasn't in the dense crowd. This made Lawrence's heart skip a beat. His many years of blind confidence in Han Shua had come into play at this time. Lawrence smiled faintly and said calmly, "It's all right. With Brian here, there shouldn't be any danger. Hee, you see, the ceremony hasn't really ended yet. As the most important guest this time, how can I leave early?" Candide was somewhat surprised to see that Lawrence wasn't the slightest bit afraid and could even chat cheerfully and wittily with him. He nodded inwardly, feeling that this king was indeed out of the ordinary. Previously, Candide had seen Ermite Cotton and Gree arrive. Having a rough understanding of their strengths, Candide felt somewhat relieved. Seeing that the situation was still unclear, he was in no hurry to continue urging Lawrence. When Han Shua recommended Pegasus and Gree to Candide, he had vaguely pointed out their strengths to Candide. With Han Shua's assurance, Candide believed that the two should truly be as strong as Han Shua had said. He didn't know Ermite Cotton's identity, but he did know that Han Shua had said that Ermite Cotton was a bit stronger than Gree and Pegasus. Therefore, when he saw that the two had arrived before him, he felt somewhat reassured. Radiant Blast was a forbidden magic that covered a large area of effect. It used the element of light to create a strong light that sprinkled down. All living things within the light's reach would be killed. The more powerful a forbidden magic was, the longer it would take for it to be released. This was especially true for the Radiant Blast this time. Perhaps the people who had arrived were aware of how terrifying Han Shua and the others were. Therefore, the Radiant Blast took a little longer to prepare than usual. As time passed, the dazzling light in the sky grew brighter and brighter. Gradually, the people below could no longer keep their eyes open. By the time the entire place was filled with dazzling light and the plaza looked as though it was directly illuminated by the scorching sun, the originally calm nobles were now showing signs of nervousness. The students of the various faculties of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force who had followed their teachers here were panic-stricken. They couldn't help but make a ruckus. Heavens, this seems to be the precursor to the Radiant Blast, forbidden magic of the light element. The person in charge of the Light Academy, Voigtlander, had his suspicions in the beginning. Afterwards, he suddenly recalled the records of the Radiant Blast on an ancient scroll that he had been researching recently. He suddenly screamed. Voigtlander's scream scared the majority of the people half to death. Not all of these people had strong willpower and were unafraid of death. They all knew clearly in their hearts what forbidden magic meant. As the person in charge of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, Voigtlander definitely wouldn't speak carelessly on such an occasion. Therefore, when they heard his scream, many people began to panic. What do we do? What do we do? Forbidden magic. Am I going to die here? Heavens, I shouldn't have come. We're finished this time. Your Majesty, Please retreat quickly. This really does seem like the radiant blast, forbidden magic of the light element. Below the plaza, all kinds of panic-stricken voices rose and fell. Some students who had never seen the world, as well as those nobles who were greedy for life and afraid of death, were all shrieking like ghosts, scared out of their wits. However, the Lancelot Empire was a country with extremely strict hierarchy. Now that King Lawrence of the Lancelot Empire was here and hadn't left first, although those people were wailing like ghosts and howling like wolves, scared half to death, they could only stare at Lawrence anxiously and didn't dare to flee in front of him. Your Majesty, looking at this momentum, it should really be the precursor to the forbidden magic Radiant Blast. This forbidden magic has been brewing for such a long time. Its power should be extremely terrifying. Do you think we should leave and lie low for a while? One of the three heavyweights of the Dark Mantle, Ames, advised Lawrence with a calm face. At this moment, Lawrence was also a bit afraid in his heart. However, facing the gazes of so many ministers, Lawrence didn't show it. Although he was laughing bitterly in his heart, his face was still calm as he asked Ames, if it really is the forbidden light magic Radiant Blast, then its area of effect should be extremely large. Do you think we can escape in such a short amount of time? Ames stared blankly for a moment before shaking his head with a bitter smile, replying, if it really is the Radiant Blast, I'm afraid we won't be able to escape even if we immediately escape now. Then that's it. Since escaping is useless, we'll just wait here. Lawrence pretended to be calm as he smiled faintly. Don't worry, with Brian here, nothing will happen to everyone. On the podium, Fanny, who had just completed the handover of her position as dean, smiled confidently and didn't seem to be nervous at all. Yes, as long as that kid is here, this place will definitely be safe. You bunch of cowards. What's there to be afraid of? Who knows? Maybe you'll die because Brian can't take care of you if you run out of this area. After witnessing Han Shua's strength, Forenza and Fanny had the same blind confidence in Han Shua. They looked sloppily and disdainfully at those cowards as they ridiculed them. With Lawrence saying so, Fanny and Forenza also saying so, those people who were originally trembling with fear and wanted to escape all hesitated. When these people saw that the three of them were staying here so calmly, they pondered in their hearts for a moment before also staying here while trembling. However, they didn't feel confident in their hearts. Why did it suddenly turn dark? While those important figures were pondering in their hearts, a crisp and tender voice cried out in alarm. Everyone raised their heads to look and suddenly discovered that the glaring light in the sky had unknowingly been covered by masses of dark clouds. Those dark clouds were as black as ink, forcibly blocking the glaring light in the sky that was originally shining with boundless radiance. Under the clear sky and bright sun, those ink-like dark clouds above their heads were like a huge, unrolled painting of the night. They forcibly covered the glaring light, causing the day to slowly turn into a pitch-black night. At the same time that this strange change occurred in the sky, a sinister and evil aura enveloped the entire plaza. Streaks of bloody light shot out from an unknown place and sank into the ink-like blood clouds. It seemed to be changing the state of the dark clouds, causing them to become even thicker and more solid. It's Brian. Don't worry, there shouldn't be any problems. When he saw the streaks of bloody light shooting out from the sky, Lawrence's heart calmed down and he couldn't conceal his pleasant surprise as he cried out. Having known Han Shua for many years, Lawrence already knew that Han Shua practiced an extremely mysterious martial technique in addition to necromancy magic. Lawrence was one of the few people who had seen Han Shua use demonic magic. When he saw the streaks of bloody light appear, he immediately confirmed his guess. He knew that Han Shua must have begun to resist the radiant blast that was about to be successfully released. That's right, Brian has made his move. Candide clearly heaved a sigh of relief as he spoke to comfort the crowd. Those who had a close relationship with Han Shua, or perhaps had seen Han Shua in action, were greatly reassured after hearing Lawrence and Candide's words. They had no reason to believe that Han Shua could eliminate the threat caused by the forbidden magic. On the other hand, the majority of the nobles and students who didn't know much about Han Shua didn't dare to be so confident. They were still nervously looking all around, ready to defend themselves at any moment. It's coming. Get ready. On top of the bell tower, Han Shuo, Ermite Cotton, and Gree had been protecting the surroundings. When he sensed that the radiant blast had been completed, he suddenly shouted. Chapter 616. Han Shua's soft shout caused Ermite Cotton and Gree's hearts to tremble. They could not help but focus their attention to the extreme, fully concentrating on guarding against the oncoming attack of the radiant blast. Han Shuo unfurled his consciousness and clearly observed the changes of the radiant blast at every second. He sensed the high-speed condensation, division, and recombination of the elements of light as he calmly prepared himself. The radiant blast was a type of light attack that condensed an enormous amount of elements of light to form a large area of effect. Based on Han Shuo's understanding of the dazzling radiance in the sky, he knew that the power of this radiant blast was not to be underestimated. The light curtain grew larger and larger as the elements of light became denser and denser. Tens of thousands of dazzling rays of light suddenly sprinkled down from the sky above the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. They were like tens of thousands of light swords, intending to annihilate all living beings below. As the might of the radiant blast was unleashed to its fullest, a solemn and sacred aura also filled the radiant blast, boosting the might of the forbidden magic and enveloping it in an instant. Han Shuo's eyes sparkled as he resolutely raised his head to look at the radiant blast that was crashing down. His heart was as tranquil as still water, without the slightest ripple. The radiant blast not only enveloped the entire Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, but also enveloped more than half of the northern city district. It suddenly came crashing down like a scorching sun, appearing extremely terrifying. All the residents of the northern city district, regardless of what they were doing, stopped what they were doing. Each and every one of them looked up at the sky above their heads in horror. Deep fear surged into their hearts in an instant, causing panicked sobs to erupt one after another. The atmosphere of the end of the world instantly filled everyone's hearts. No one knew how miserable their deaths would be. Everyone became extremely terrified amidst the trembling in their hearts. Just as the residents of the northern city district of Asan City were screaming in fear, they suddenly discovered that dark clouds appeared out of thin air and floated above their heads. The dazzling rays of light came crashing down, but were forcibly intercepted by the dark clouds. In the blink of an eye, Asan City's northern district turned from day to night. Dark clouds pressed down, bloody light soared, and shrill whistles rang out repeatedly. All kinds of spectacles suddenly appeared in the sky. Rumble. An earth-shattering roar suddenly erupted in the sky. It was as if thousands of thunderbolts had exploded at the same time, causing everyone's eardrums to ring. Colorful lights appeared in the sky, along with the explosion. They were like the most gorgeous fireworks, releasing their beauty to their heart's content. Although the dark clouds in the sky were thick and dense, there were still some places that were overlooked. Dazzling rays of light pierced through the clouds tenaciously. The people and things that were illuminated by the strong light burst apart one after another. Creatures, in particular, were directly turned into ashes and disappeared. In the short span of a few breaths, dozens of dazzling rays of light pierced through the clouds, causing the deaths of dozens of innocent civilians and the collapse of over 100 houses. On top of the bell tower of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, Han Shuo sat cross-legged on the ground. He closed his eyes and formed a seal with his hands, manipulating the blood seether that was churning in the dark clouds. He poured demonic yuan into the blood seether, causing it to emit a dense bloody mist that blended with the dark clouds that Ermite Cotton had condensed using dark magic into the endless night. In addition, Gree the Banshee used her wind magic to mobilize hurricanes at high speed, causing the bloody mist in Han Shuo's blood seether to fuse with the endless night, forming a large area of boundary that enveloped the northern city district. Han Shuo did not know how many people had come this time. However, he was certain that there was at least one base god among them. Otherwise, there was no way he could have released such a terrifyingly powerful radiant blast. After adjusting his body, mind, and spirit to their optimal state, Han Shuo continued to operate the blood seether, continuously producing bloody mist that had special effects. He did his best to make up for every gap and prevent the dense radiant blast from being projected down. Not far away from Han Shuo, Ermite Cotton's body was shrouded in absolute darkness. He was rapidly chanting an incantation with a grave expression on his face. On the rooftop of the library, Gree the Banshee was screaming at the top of her lungs. One hurricane after another was drifting in every direction. As the fierce winds whistled past, the plaza was filled with sand, stones, and dust. "Brian, we can't hold on much longer." Ermite Cotton hastily shouted to Han Shuo beside him after chanting a long and cryptic incantation. Han Shuo, who had his eyes closed, slightly creased his brows. He chanted a short necromancy incantation. Little Skull, riding on a bone dragon, appeared in a flash of light. Little Skull, who was telepathically connected to Han Shuo, descended from the netherworld. His eyes shone with a sinister, icy radiance. The gravestone on his chest emitted a misty green radiance. Innumerable wraiths and gargoyles surged out one after another. They danced in all directions amidst the howling winds, forming a second barrier in the sky. As soon as the second barrier formed by the wraiths and gargoyles summoned by Little Skull was formed, the pressure on Han Shuo, Ermite Cotton, and Little Skull was relieved. They no longer had to deliberately conceal themselves and began to make up for the gaps. The barrier formed by Han Shuo's trio wasn't seamless. Since they had to use all their strength to form a barrier to protect the people below, their energy and strength were limited. They couldn't take care of everything. As a result, the gaps in the first barrier grew larger and larger. However, as soon as Little Skull appeared, he used his divine energy to summon a second barrier. This immediately relieved the pressure on Han Shuo's trio. They no longer had to worry about the gaps in the first barrier. Little Skull was Han Shuo's secret weapon. After he appeared, he formed the second barrier. While sacrificing some low-level wraiths and gargoyles, he truly protected the commoners and nobles of the Empire, preventing them from being threatened by the radiant blast. The radiant blast that the assailants had expended so much effort to create was extremely terrifying. However, it was precisely because it was so powerful that the amount of energy it consumed was also extremely shocking. It was impossible to maintain for long. As expected, not long after Little Skull summoned the wraiths and gargoyles to form the second barrier, the radiant blast gradually reached its end. After the scattered specks of light scattered down, the sky north of Asen City finally returned to normal. Seeing that the radiant blast had reached its end, Han Shuo calmly issued an order to Little Skull. He also instructed Ermite Cotton to not let down his guard. He immediately closed his eyes and continued to search for traces of the assailants with all his might. With the threat of the radiant blast gone, under Han Shuo's command, Little Skull took the lead in sending the wraiths and gargoyles back to the netherworld, while he himself concealed himself in the shadows. Ermite Cotton also stopped chanting dark elemental incantations. With the relaxation of his mental strength and the blowing of the Banshee Gree, the dark clouds that had been shrouding everyone's heads rapidly dispersed. The clear sky once again appeared above the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. What exactly happened just now? I couldn't see anything. I only heard the concentrated sounds of thunder. I thought I had been killed by the explosion. That blinding light has disappeared. The dark clouds have also disappeared. Does this mean that we no longer have to worry and be afraid? It should be fine now. I can no longer feel that suffocating pressure. The crowd below discussed spiritedly. The fear on their faces had turned into doubt. Every one of them looked around curiously, as though they were trying to find the answer to their questions from the changes in their surroundings. Heavens, what happened to those houses? They're all destroyed. An archmage of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force used the levitation spell to fly into the sky after the darkness had dispersed. After surveying the area from afar, he immediately exclaimed, "That's a phenomenon caused by the radiant blast. If any living being is hit by the strong light, they will immediately turn into ashes and disappear. It seems that the radiant blast has descended. However, it seems that 99% of the attacks were intercepted. Otherwise, the situation in the northern city district would definitely not be like this." Ames also flew into the sky and surveyed the surroundings. He walked to King Lawrence's side and respectfully said to Lawrence, "That damned Church of Light. Do they even deserve to preach benevolence to others?" Lawrence gnashed his teeth, his entire body trembling in anger. In the entire profound continent, only the Church of Light, with the most and strongest light magi, could display the might of the radiant blast to such an extent. In addition, the Church of Light had always been at odds with the Lancelot Empire. There was simply no need to think too much to know that there were definitely people from the Church of Light among the attackers. Too despicable, too shameless. Their Church of Light is indeed the greatest evil cult in the world. To actually do such a heartless thing. Old Han was also trembling in anger. He had never expected that the Church of Light would act so crazily. They actually disregarded the lives of so many civilians in Asen City and released forbidden magic over a large area. This was a violation of the tacit agreement of many countries in the profound continent. The Church of Light's actions could no longer be described as simply crazy. Ames immediately dispatched soldiers to pacify the people. "Candide, investigate for me. We must find the person who committed such a heinous crime," Lawrence ordered, flustered and exasperated. "Yes, Your Majesty." Ames and Candide answered simultaneously. They were also extremely furious in their hearts. "Didn't I say that it's still safe to stay here? If you didn't listen to me and rashly walked out of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, you might have already been turned into ashes." After the incident, Firenze let out a light sigh of relief. He disdainfully looked at those who were trembling with fear and wanted to escape and ridiculed them. After escaping death, those people still had some lingering fear in their hearts. Each and every one of them smiled bitterly and shook their heads without saying a word, ignoring Firenze. "Where's that fella Brian? The matter is over. Where did he run off to?" Seeing that those people did not refute, Firenze also felt somewhat bored and did not continue to stare at them. Instead, he looked all around him and asked. After hearing what he said, knowing that Han Shuo had saved all of them, each and every one of them began to search for traces of Han Shuo. However, no matter how they looked, they could not find Han Shuo's whereabouts. A faint line of blood gradually disappeared from a blind spot that no one could see, heading towards the outskirts of the northern city district. Chapter 617. The sky-shrinking shadow searching technique was a demonic art that was commonly used to search for strange objects. Han Shuo had used this technique to detect a region outside the city where a vacuum had formed. Feeling that something was amiss, he took the opportunity to sneak over. Under normal circumstances, air would fill any place. As long as there was space, there would definitely not be a vacuum zone. Once a region turned into a vacuum, it was definitely man-made, unless it was formed naturally. Given Han Shuo's familiarity with Asen City, he had never seen a vacuum zone around the northern city district. Therefore, he determined that the abnormality in that region was most likely man-made. The handover ceremony for Fanny, as the dean of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, had already concluded. With Ermite Cotton and Gree around, in addition to Little Skull watching over them in secret, Han Shuo believed that the dignitaries of the Empire who remained in the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force shouldn't be in any danger. Now that he had nothing to worry about, Han Shuo turned into a faint line of blood that was hard to see with the naked eye and quickly flew out of the northern city district, not alerting anyone along the way. The distance from the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force to the outskirts of the city was only slightly more than 5 kilometers. With Han Shuo's speed, it only took him a few minutes to arrive at the vacuum zone. Upon arriving, Han Shuo only needed to silently observe his surroundings. He was certain that those who attacked the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force must be inside. Right in front of him was a spatial boundary that was condensed with energy. It had opened up a small force field. Behind the boundary, a glaring radiance obstructed Han Shuo's naked eye from peeking inside. Divine aura converged into the shape of a giant cup, filling the boundary and forming a thin layer of protective membrane, isolating Han Shuo's consciousness from sensing anything. Han Shuo narrowed his eyes. A cold glint flickered in his eyes. He could clearly see that the giant cup formed from divine aura was the divine weapon of the Church of Light, the Holy Grail. On top of the Holy Grail, there were several olive branches radiating with golden radiance. They were also constantly releasing divine energy, maintaining the protection of this region. The divine weapons of the Church of Light had the effect of amplifying light magic. The divine energy contained within could even form a miraculous defensive force. The reason why Han Shua's consciousness was unable to detect the presence of the intruders in the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force was most likely due to the divine energy. Han Shua's lips curled into a cold smile as he stared at the vacuum zone formed by all sorts of mystical powers. He was not in a hurry to make a move. Han Shua, who was hiding in the dark, believed that it would be very difficult for the people inside to discover him. His divine sense spread out, and with this area as the center, it gradually spread out in all directions, carefully searching the surroundings for any unexpected dangers that might appear. At the same time, a few incantations were chanted. Wood Elite Zombie, Metal Elite Zombie, and Earth Elite Zombie flew over from the Netherworld. Under Han Shua's instructions, they surrounded the vacuum zone in a triangular formation. Fire Elite Zombie and Water Elite Zombie had obtained enormous opportunities in the Abyss realm. They were still slowly digesting the energy from the two great abyssal demons and could not assist Han Shua in the short term. Therefore, they could not fully deploy the penta-elemental undead formation. Han Shua had no idea what kind of strength the intruders in the vacuum zone possessed. As his other two avatars were still recovering in the Cemetery of Death, Han Shua was afraid that he might encounter the Primordius Dragon. Therefore, he did not dare to be careless. He cautiously summoned the 3 active zombies and deployed the incomplete penta-elemental undead formation in advance, in case of emergencies. When all preparations were in order, Han Shua gave the little skeleton, who had stayed behind at the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, an order to come quickly. Only then did he take out a pearl of annihilation with a cold smile and tossed it into the empty space not far away without the slightest hesitation. Rumble. The pearl of annihilation suddenly exploded in that area, causing the space to instantly distort and collapse. It tore open a few sword-long rifts, allowing the soul piercers to fly in. After tossing out a pearl of annihilation, Han Shua coldly stared at the vacuum zone in front of him, ready to launch a surprise attack at any time. Cough, cough, cough. What's that? Why did it suddenly explode? An urgent voice transmitted into Han Shua's ears through the rifts in the vacuum zone. I don't know. Could it be that the mixture of several types of magic has caused a bad mutation? An ice-cold voice replied indifferently. Enemies! A loud cry suddenly sounded from within. Following this loud cry, the inside of the vacuum zone suddenly became chaotic. In the instant a few rifts appeared in that vacuum region, Han Shua, who had been unable to pry into the situation inside, immediately used his consciousness to ascertain the approximate strength of the few people inside through those rifts. As all kinds of energies were mixed within the boundary, Han Shua still couldn't make out the appearance of the intruders. He could only rely on the acute senses of his consciousness to discern their identities from the aura within their bodies. There were 6 intruders in total. 3 of them had the holy aura of the Church of Light, 2 had bodies and temperaments as cold as ice, likely experts who were not at the Shrine of Ice's snowfield. The last one had a body filled with frenzied explosive energy, yet his soul was strange like that of a shaman. It seemed that after the death of hundreds of thousands of orcs in the Empire of Orcs, the true experts had also joined the fray. There were a total of 6 people. 3 of them were followers of the Church of Light, 2 were demigods, and 1 was a base god with astonishing strength. The 2 experts from the Shrine of Ice were merely sacred magi, the weakest among them. It seemed that after losing the 2 demigods, Ice Celestial Kori and Snow Celestial Tiana, the Shrine of Ice was indeed completely finished. As for that orc shaman, because he cultivated in the energy of summoning, which was considered to be an unorthodox path, Han Shua couldn't determine the specific stage of his strength for the time being. He only felt that the orc shaman seemed to be slightly stronger than a demigod, but still a short distance away from the realm of base gods. Among the 6, 1 base god, 3 demigods including the orc shaman, and 2 sacred magi who were nothing to be afraid of. In the eyes of the present Han Shua, such strength didn't seem all that powerful. Therefore, Han Shuo did not continue hiding in the shadows, but came out in the open. He coldly gazed at the space before him, waiting for the six to come out. Even if it was only his main body, Han Shuo believed that it wouldn't be difficult for him to deal with these 6 people. Not to mention that little skull, a low god of death, was on the way. "Come out!" Han Shuo coldly shouted. The vacuum boundary abruptly quietened down. Han Shuo sneered incessantly in his mind. He could even feel the fear in the hearts of the 2 sacred magi of the Shrine of Ice. Under Han Shuo's attentive gaze, the boundary in front of him finally gave up its stubborn defense. Streams of divine energy returned to the center of the Holy Grail. The energy maintaining the space boundary also gradually disappeared. Everything rapidly returned to its original state. When the last stream of golden light returned to the Holy Grail, the space before him shattered like a mirror, revealing the original scene. A skinny middle-aged man, wearing a crown of light on his head and holding a Holy Grail with an olive branch in his hand, looked at Han Shuo with a bitter and hateful expression. Beside him were a demigod knight and a demigod light archmage. They were none other than the 2 that Han Shuo had met at the sacred mountain of the Church of Light. They were the ones who instigated the Primordius Dragon to keep Han Shuo in the Abyss Realm forever in the Dragon Valley of the Dark Forest. An elderly orc draped in simple animal skin was looking at Han Shuo with hatred. He looked as though he couldn't wait to pounce on Han Shuo and devour him whole. The last 2 sacred magi of the Shrine of Ice were also looking at Han Shuo with hatred. However, their eyes were flickering. It seemed that their fear of Han Shuo was greater than their determination to exact revenge. "You must be Brian?" The skinny middle-aged man wearing a crown on his head asked in a benevolent and tranquil voice. However, his eyes were flickering. Han Shuo put on a faint smile and bowed at him in a friendly manner. Then, he replied, "That's right, Your Holiness. Hee, you must be very disappointed to see me appear before you, right?" Han Shuo was very astonished when he said those words. He did not expect that the Pope of the Church of Light would personally come to Lancelot City from the Odin Empire, traveling thousands of miles just for him. Not only that, he even chose to launch a sneak attack. It seemed that this Pope of the Church of Light was indeed a madman who would do anything to achieve his goals. It was no wonder that he could become the leader of the strongest religion on Profound Continent. The Light Pope nodded and calmly admitted, "I am indeed very disappointed to see you standing before me unscathed. However, what I feel even more is sorrow for the dark era that Profound Continent is about to usher in." "Oh, from what you have said, I am the root cause of the calamity on Profound Continent. Hee, in that case, shouldn't the lives and deaths of the hundreds of thousands of civilians in the Northern City District be your concern?" Han Shuo was so furious that he laughed when he heard the Light Pope's shameless words. "For the safety of everyone on Profound Continent, some sacrifices are necessary." The Light Pope shouted righteously while looking at Han Shuo. "T." Han Shuo pointed at the Light Pope's face and cursed. He knew that this Light Pope should be the most fanatical believer of the Church of Light. Han Shuo could not sense too many emotions and desires from the Light Pope. Instead, the Light Pope was like a puppet fabricated by the Church of Light. All of his actions and norms were based on the interests of the Church of Light. Talking to him was just a waste of breath. "You will pay for the hundreds of thousands of my orc children's lives today." The orc shaman roared when he saw that Han Shuo was being so savage. From his posture, it seemed as though he was about to charge at Han Shuo and risk his life. How could Han Shuo be afraid of him? He sized up the orc shaman with a sneer and mocked, "You orcs are humans, but the people of our Lancelot Empire are not. All along, you orcs have been carrying out endless attacks on our Lancelot Empire. Who am I going to settle the score with for the deaths of the people of Lancelot Empire who have disappeared in the long river of history?" The orcs' territory was barren and therefore they had been attacking the Lancelot Empire for the sake of rich land. After so many years, the number of civilians of Lancelot Empire who had died at the hands of orc warriors was definitely less than 100,000. "I don't care. In any case, you have killed more than 100,000 of our people. You must die." The orc shaman bellowed like a wild beast. Soon after, he really pounced at Han Shua. Chapter 6:18. The moment he moved, the berserk energy contained within his body immediately boiled up. That energy boosted his strength and speed, allowing him to arrive before Han Shua in the blink of an eye. A palm the size of a cattail leaf fan, covered in calluses, grabbed at Han Shua's neck at lightning speed. The old shaman did not use conventional methods to summon powerful magical beasts, nor did he use any secret shaman arts. It seemed as though neither would work on Han Shua. Instead, he directly activated the berserk energy contained within his body and launched a sudden close-range attack. This was somewhat unexpected to Han Shua. The three experts of the Church of Light, the Supreme Pontiff of Light and the two demigods, seemed to have been waiting for the old shaman to make his move. When the old shaman's body suddenly shot towards Han Shua, the eyes of the three lit up and they attacked together to deal with Han Shua. The Divine Knight was a step slower than the old shaman. He madly dashed towards Han Shua from the side. A strange light flashed and a spear glistening with divine radiance appeared in his hand out of nowhere. The spear was 3.5 meters long and was sparkling with golden radiance. It contained an awe-inspiring divine energy. The Supreme Pontiff of Light and the Light Demigod Magus lowered their heads and lowered their brows at the same time, silently chanting cryptic incantations. The Supreme Pontiff was holding the Holy Grail. On top of the Holy Grail was one of the divine weapons, the olive branch. The crown of light on his head also contained an astonishing amount of divine energy. The Supreme Pontiff of Light, who originally only possessed the strength of a base god, was able to gather more and more energy by relying on the Holy Grail, olive branch, and the crown of light on his head. The element of light constantly converged between the three divine weapons and flowed into his body in an unending stream, boosting his strength. The light element demigod sorcerer held a cross in his hand and pressed it tightly against his chest. Rays of golden light were emitted from the cross, and a pair of light wings suddenly appeared on his back. He hovered in the air, and the pair of light wings made him look like an extraordinary person. From the looks of it, the cross that this demigod mage was holding should be one of the artifacts of the Church of Light. This time, the Church of Light had really invested a lot. As for the last two sacred magi of the Shrine of Ice, due to their extreme fear of Han Shua, when the old shaman made his move and the Light Pontiff and the other two experts made their moves simultaneously, they didn't seem to be able to react in time. They just stood there in a daze, forgetting to coordinate with each other. It appeared that what Han Shua had done to the Shrine of Ice's snowy domain had deeply shocked them. They didn't dare to act rashly under such circumstances. It would take a long time to describe, but everything happened in the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint. However, because of the marvelous nature of Han Shua's divine sense, in such a short period of time, he was still able to spy in all directions and clearly imprint everyone's actions in his heart. Calmly staring at the old shaman's calloused hand, Han Shua narrowed his eyes. A cruel and bloodthirsty glint shone from within. However, his body remained motionless, like a boulder that had taken root. Han Shua remained motionless. Naturally, the old shaman's large hand landed on his neck. Crack. The old shaman's large hand viciously clasped onto Han Shua's neck, where the veins were twisting like little snakes. A trace of pleasant surprise suddenly appeared in his venomous eyes. He didn't seem to think that he would be able to succeed so easily. This unexpected pleasant surprise caused him to subconsciously reflect it in his eyes. Creak. The moment the old shaman's large hand tightly clasped Han Shua's neck, he suddenly exerted force. The berserk energy within his body erupted with a loud rumble like a mountain torrent. He exerted all his strength to tighten his grip. Immediately, a sharp and clear sound rang out from Han Shua's neck. The old shaman was overjoyed. He felt that Han Shua wasn't as terrifying as the rumors made him out to be. Harboring resentment towards the deaths of over 100,000 orcs, the old shaman's calloused hand tightened tighter and tighter. It seemed as if Han Shua's neck would be completely broken at any moment. Whoosh whoosh. The Divine Knight's sudden whistling sound rang in Han Shua's ears. That dazzling golden spear suddenly appeared from the side like a venomous snake, stabbing fiercely at Han Shua's waist. Seeing that Han Shua's neck was already tightly gripped by the old shaman, the Divine Knight was reassured. He launched this attack without the slightest bit of concealment or retreat. It was as if he was certain that Han Shua couldn't move at all, and that the battle would end in an instant. It turns out that this guy isn't all that tough after all. It seems that the Shrine of Ice's demise was only because those from the Shrine of Ice were too weak. The Divine Knight suddenly had this thought as he thrust his spear forward. The sound of the spear piercing through the intestines clearly entered the Divine Knight's ears. That beautiful sound made the corner of his mouth curl into a satisfied smile. His heart was filled with carefree joy. However, his joy didn't last long. It was immediately interrupted by a high-pitched, mournful cry of pain. Whoosh! Whoosh! You stabbed me! The old shaman exasperatedly cried out in pain. The Divine Knight was startled. The satisfied smile on his face vanished without a trace. He stared at the old shaman whose belly had been pierced by the spear in confusion. His heart was filled with incredulity. He couldn't understand why his attack, which should have been aimed at Han Shua, would ultimately land on the old shaman. Creak! Creak! The old orc shaman was shrieking miserably like he was having convulsions. Even as he cried out in pain, the large hand that was gripping Han Shua's neck was still exerting force with all its might, producing frightening noises on Han Shua's neck. However, despite the old shaman's exertion, Han Shua, who should have died from having his neck broken, had an ice-cold and calm expression in his eyes. There was even a hint of a mocking smile on the corner of his mouth, as though he didn't feel the slightest bit of pain. It was as though the neck that the old shaman had constricted with all his strength wasn't his at all. The Divine Knight was shocked. Just as he was about to pull back, a large hand pierced through the old shaman's right chest. Blood splattered everywhere as the hand suddenly pierced into his chest. The golden armor that even the swords and spears of the holy knights couldn't break through was as fragile as a thin piece of paper in front of the bloody hand. It didn't even have the slightest resistance before the hand pierced through the right side of the holy knight's chest. The hand pierced through his body and exposed the palm on his back. At this moment, the Divine Knight slightly turned his head and looked around. Only then did he discover that Han Shua's arm was still stuck in the old shaman's chest. At this moment, the Divine Knight was horrified to discover that the old shaman's arm was still wrapped around Han Shua's neck. Just the distance between Han Shua and the old shaman was the length of an arm. Due to the spear piercing through the old shaman's intestines, the distance between the Divine Knight and the old shaman was at least 2 meters. In addition to the old shaman's thick body, the distance between the Divine Knight and Han Shua was at least 4 meters. In that case, just how long was the arm that pierced through the old shaman's body? Was it still a human? The Divine Knight suddenly felt his blood run cold. His scalp tingled as he looked at the arm that was connected to him and the old shaman. An indescribable fear suddenly welled up in his heart. The contempt he had for Han Shua had long been thrown out the window. Ignoring the excruciating pain in his body, he pointed at Han Shua and screamed in pain. "You, what kind of monster are you?" Han Shua grinned coldly and said, "When you die, go ask the God of Light." As soon as he finished speaking, the huge hand that had pierced through the bodies of the 2 demigods suddenly slashed downwards. This hand seemed to have become a sharp blade in an instant, cutting open the intestines of the 2 people without any obstruction. Starting from the right side of their chests, the 2 people's bodies were torn apart. Their bloody intestines mixed with their kidneys and lungs spilled all over the ground. With another wave of the hand, the upper bodies of the 2 demigods were also torn apart. The 2 demigods who were alive and kicking just a moment ago were now reduced to 4. However, they were no longer alive. The scene was extremely bloody and cruel. The nauseating smell of blood pervaded the air. Before the Light Pope and the demigod Magus could finish their cryptic incantation, the battle had already ended. The 2 of them raised their brows slightly, their eyes revealing a look of unwillingness to watch. As for the 2 sacred magi of the Shrine of Ice, the confidence that they had just mustered collapsed with a loud bang. An even deeper fear assaulted them in an instant, completely crushing their willpower. They panted heavily and could no longer muster up any thoughts of revenge. Oh, you still want to escape with your soul? Hee, not a bad idea, but I'm sorry. After tearing the two bodies into four, Han Shuo was about to turn around and deal with the two from the Church of Light when his consciousness suddenly detected that the old shaman's soul had yet to dissipate. Instead, it was drifting away with the wind. As long as a soul was gathered and did not dissipate, it could often be reborn using a powerful soul magnetic field and a new medium through special methods. That divine knight of the Church of Light was not proficient in the arts of the soul. Therefore, after his physical body was destroyed, his soul gradually dissipated between heaven and earth. There was definitely no hope of rebirth. Seeing that the old shaman's soul was drifting away with the wind, Han Shuo let out a low cry. He raised his hand and flicked. A streak of black radiance struck the old shaman's soul. The black radiance guided the old shaman's soul to be captured by Han Shuo and imprisoned in the ring that Gilbert originally wore. For his soul to not dissipate after his death, this old orc shaman's soul energy was pretty good. It was very suitable for Han Shuo to refine some demonic weapons that required a powerful soul as a primer. Naturally, Han Shuo was captured and brought back by Han Shuo. Let me go. I'm going to fight you to the death, you shameless bastard. After falling into the ring, Han Shuo could hear the old orc shaman's unreconciled bellow through the ring's miraculous function. What a pitiful guy. You are already dead. How are you going to fight me? Hee, in a few days, I will use your soul to refine something. When that time comes, you will lose your consciousness and be under my control forever. Don't you think that will be very interesting? Han Shuo laughed evilly. His consciousness entered the ring and conveyed such a malicious message to the old shaman. This made the old shaman even more restless and irritable, but he was powerless to do anything. The old shaman's soul fell into the ring. Even though he knew that his future would be tragic, he could do nothing but wait for the arrival of doomsday. There was nothing he could do. Chapter 619. After getting rid of the Divine Knight and the old shaman, Han Shuo's eyes focused on the Light Pope and the demigod Magus. As for the two sacred magi from the Shrine of Ice, Han Shuo completely disregarded them. On one hand, it was because the two of them were weak. On the other hand, it was because they had already lost all will to fight and fear. Even if they had the same strength as Han Shuo wouldn't take them seriously, let alone two sacred magi. From the moment the Divine Knight and the old shaman charged at Han Shuo, the Light Pope and the demigod Magus had never stopped chanting their incantations. Only when the Divine Knight and the old shaman were pierced through by Han Shuo did the two of them raise their heads to look at the old shaman and the Divine Knight with grief in their eyes. However, it was only a glance. Soon after, the Light Pope and the demigod Magus lowered their heads and continued chanting something. The incantation was long and difficult to understand, and the tone was heavy and oppressive. It was as though they were brewing some extremely terrifying killing intent. The Divine Knight and the old shaman were dead. When Han Shuo turned to look at the Light Pope and the demigod Magus, he discovered that the two of them were still chanting something as though there was no one around them. It was as though they had no idea that Han Shuo was glaring at them like a tiger watching its prey, ready to kill them at any time. This kind of undistracted concentration gave Han Shuo a bad feeling. This feeling was very sudden and strange. Therefore, Han Shuo did not act rashly. Instead, he became even more cautious. The Light Pope and the demigod Magus possessed unfathomable willpower that did not fear death. However, the two sacred magi from the Shrine of Ice were much more vulnerable. Han Shuo's cold gaze did not linger on them. However, the two of them, who were fearful of Han Shuo, felt that Han Shuo's target had fallen on them. After the Shrine of Ice was destroyed, the two of them had thought of avenging the Shrine of Ice. This time, it could be said that they had put their hopes into action. But when they stood before Han Shuo and saw him coldly and cruelly finishing off the Divine Knight and the old shaman with ease, the fear that they had been suppressing due to the destruction of the Shrine of Ice exploded in an instant, shattering their already shaky resolve for revenge. Arg! The fear in their hearts grew stronger and stronger. Finally, the two of them could not hold it in any longer and started screaming hysterically. In an instant, the two sacred magi of the Shrine of Ice seemed to have suddenly gone mad. They opened their mouths and fired a series of ice magic at Han Shuo in rapid succession. Ice shards roared as they rolled towards Han Shuo, while their broad-bladed ice swords glinted with crystalline cold light as they ruthlessly stabbed at Han Shuo. At the same time, the two sacred magi who had been attacking frantically actually did not retreat. Their faces were filled with complex expressions of fear and resentment. Han Shuo let out a soft gasp of surprise. He knew that these two sacred magi from the Shrine of Ice were simply too terrified. Their actions were already mixed with too many chaotic emotions. There was no need to fear them at all. However, as they had participated in the attack on the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, in addition to the fact that they were top-notch experts of the Shrine of Ice, Han Shuo naturally would not let them leave alive. Amidst the roars of ice that filled the sky, Han Shuo suddenly disappeared from where he stood. In the next moment, Han Shuo appeared out of thin air in the path that the two sacred magi had to take in order to retreat. He unfolded the demonic blades in his two hands. It was as though two gigantic and bewitching flower buds had suddenly bloomed in his palms. With a twist of his wrist, the originally pure white and cold flower buds were stained with scarlet blood, dyeing the two enormous flowers into an incomparably gorgeous and beautiful state. On the backs of the two sacred magi, a bewitching flower had similarly bloomed. It was just that the wounds were a little more sinister and the blood that flowed out was also a little faster. With two muffled groans, the two sacred magi who had their minds blinded by fear laid cleanly on the ground. They were dyed blood red by two patches of grass. It was a rather beautiful sight. Clang! Han Shuo retracted his fingernails and casually shook his hand. A few drops of blood flowed in all directions. You two, do you still want to keep up the act? Of the 6 attackers, 4 had already been killed by Han Shuo. There were only 2 experts from the Church of Light left in front of him. Only then did Han Shuo look at them and speak unhurriedly. Contrary to Han Shuo's expectations, the 2 experts from the Church of Light remained indifferent to Han Shuo's questioning. They remained silent like old monks in meditation. A feeling of uneasiness welled up in Han Shuo's heart. Looking at the backs of the 2 in front of him, Han Shuo felt that they were an eyesore for no reason. His mood was also a little irritated. After his demonic arts had reached the carnal realm, Han Shuo's state of mind would rarely be disturbed in battle. This made him even more cautious towards the 2. After staring at the 2 for a while, Han Shuo coldly snorted and took a few steps back. The corners of his mouth curved into a sinister smile as he took out another pearl of annihilation. With a flick of his index finger, the pearl of annihilation suddenly shot towards the 2. Just as the pearl of annihilation was about to make contact with the 2 of them and explode, the space in front of the 2 of them suddenly rippled as if a small stone had been thrown into a calm surface. Before the pearl of annihilation could explode, it disappeared in a flash, as if it had disappeared into the water. In the next moment, the space in front of the 2 distorted in a strange manner. Under the watchful eyes of Han Shuo, this distortion only lasted for a few breaths before it returned to normal. Due to his connection with the Pearl of Annihilation, Han Shuo could clearly sense that the strange distortion in the space was caused by the explosion of the Pearl of Annihilation. Even with the connection between him and the Pearl of Annihilation, he discovered that the place where the Pearl of Annihilation exploded was extremely far away from where he was. In other words, just as the Pearl of Annihilation was about to strike the Light Pope and the 2, it was suddenly pulled into a spatial rift and exploded in another unknown and mysterious space. Han Shuo quickly understood the situation with his consciousness. He was startled and immediately rejoiced at his cautiousness. Fortunately, he did not recklessly charge towards the 2. Otherwise, he would have been pulled into the spatial rift by the Light Pope and the 2. He would not have been able to return until his divine energy was exhausted, and he would have died. How do they understand the profound edict of space? A question immediately leaped into Han Shuo's mind. He stared at the Light Pope and the 2 with puzzled eyes. using the Edict of Space to create a spatial rift out of thin air and pull the enemy's attack or even life into a spatial rift devoid of natural elements, was something that only gods who truly cultivated in the Edict of Space could do. The Light Pope and the demigod Light Elemental Mage should have cultivated in the elemental energy of light. Logically speaking, it was absolutely impossible for them to create such a mysterious and complicated spatial rift. However, the reality before his eyes told Han Shuo that everything was true. The space in front of them had indeed formed a spatial rift circle. If he were to recklessly enter it, he would very likely fall into a trap formed by high-level Edict of Space and be pulled into a spatial rift devoid of any elemental energy. Before he understood the situation, Han Shuo really did not dare to recklessly barge in. Of the 8 elemental energies and 4 edictal forces, the most mysterious were the Edict of Destiny and the Edict of Space. The number of gods who cultivated in these 2 forces was the least. Those who could cultivate in them were even rarer. Most people would not dare to recklessly touch these 2 edictal forces, and Han Shuo was no exception. Extremely puzzled, Han Shuo could not help but take a few steps back. He secretly sized up the Light Pope and the demigod Archmage in front of him. He unfolded his consciousness and did all he could to pry into every part of the two's body, trying to find the secret of the Edict of Space trap around them. There were no abnormalities in the body of the Light Pope. The elemental energy of light, mixed with divine energy, flowed into the Holy Grail and the olive branch in his hands. The crown of light on his head glowed with a golden radiance and connected with his vast mental strength. However, the source of his energy was still the elemental energy of light, so there was no problem. As for the demigod Archmage who was tightly grasping the cross, his body was even cleaner than the Light Pope's. Han Shuo could not detect any trace of the Edict of Space on his body. Moreover, his strength was relatively weak. Logically speaking, the Edict of Space trap around them should not have been created by him. What the hell is going on? Han Shuo was perplexed. A ripple appeared in his tranquil state of mind. Han Shuo's brows were tightly knitted. He did not give up on trying to figure out the abnormality in front of him. His consciousness dispersed into thin threads that were hard to be seen by the naked eye and wrapped around the Light Pope and the demigod Archmage. The consciousness belonged to the most mysterious and formless energy. It had no physical form and was untraceable. Han Shuo first tentatively released a strand of his consciousness toward the Light Pope bit by bit. Suddenly, a wondrous feeling occurred. A deathly still and desolate black hole suddenly leaped into the senses of Han Shuo's consciousness. That black hole was emitting colorful rays of light, twisting and throbbing, and emitting chaotic Edict of Space energy. Han Shuo knew that it was a tear in space. Borrowing the strength of that strand of consciousness, he carefully sensed it and discovered that the strand of consciousness was indeed not affected by the tear in space. It was not affected by any kind of energy. Han Shuo secretly praised the miraculous demonic arts and felt relieved. He left most of his consciousness in his brain. Only that strand of consciousness gradually moved forward, carefully avoiding the tear in space. Little by little, it advanced toward the Light Pope, who was clearly within reach but seemed to have a long way to go. When doing this, Han Shuo's attention was unprecedentedly focused. He could not afford to be distracted. That strand of consciousness was like a slippery loach, slithering gracefully in a muddy swamp. It was neither impatient nor greedy as it approached the Light Pope little by little. Gradually, under Han Shuo's careful probing, the incomparably wondrous consciousness really did avoid the tear in space and arrived at the narrow space where the Light Pope and the demigod Archmage were staying. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead. Han Shuo suppressed the joy in his heart and used that tiny strand of consciousness to wander around the Light Pope's body, meticulously probing every corner of his body. When that strand of consciousness slowly reached the mouth of the Holy Grail and was about to enter the Holy Grail to see what was going on, he suddenly heard a voice from the Holy Grail. "Who are you?" Chapter 620. Who are you? These 3 words made Han Shuo turn pale with fright. He had never expected that such an unfamiliar voice would come from the Holy Grail in the hands of the Light Pope. Who are you? After recovering from his shock, Han Shuo subconsciously transmitted this message, which was the same as the question in the Holy Grail. I can tell that you are not the master of the Holy Grail. So, are you a friend or an enemy of the master of the Holy Grail? The consciousness in the Holy Grail asked after a moment of silence. However, it did not state its identity. Enemy. Han Shuo replied concisely after a moment of hesitation. Han Shuo had no need to lie. No matter who the person in the Holy Grail was, or how powerful he was, Han Shuo was confident that he could escape unscathed. Since that consciousness was in the Holy Grail, it was very likely that it had been imprisoned using a special method. Therefore, Han Shuo appeared very calm. Very good. The consciousness in the Holy Grail said decisively. Under Han Shuo's attentive listening, it hurriedly said, as you have guessed, I am imprisoned in the Holy Grail. However, the one who has the ability to imprison me is naturally not the master of the Holy Grail. Using the special seal of the Holy Grail, the master of the Holy Grail can activate the Holy Grail to obtain some of my abilities. The spatial fissures in the surroundings were released by the master of the Holy Grail using my powers. Well, since you are the master of the Holy Grail, I have to tell you that the master of the Holy Grail is still borrowing my powers. In about 2 minutes, the time in this area will be locked. As long as you are in this area, you will not be able to move, and can only be killed by the master of the Holy Grail. There is absolutely no chance of escape. Han Shuo was shocked. He knew that gods who cultivated in the Edict of Space did possess the miraculous ability to temporarily stop time. The stronger one's divine energy and the higher one's realm, the greater the area of effect and the longer the duration of the effect would be. In a battle between two people, especially a battle between high-level gods, a single second of carelessness could often end the battle. Imagine, once you attacked your opponent, time would stop just as you were about to hit your target. In this state, your opponent would be able to take advantage of this time gap to kill you in an instant. This was indeed very terrifying. Han Shuo's heart sank when he heard this from the person inside the Holy Grail. From the urgent tone of the person inside the Holy Grail, Han Shuo believed that the person was not joking, so he immediately asked, how wide is the range of effect? A radius of 100 miles, the person in the Holy Grail replied. Heaving a sigh of relief, Han Shuo transmitted, if you have a solution, tell me quickly. Otherwise, I will leave for the time being. I don't know how your soul can pass through the spatial barrier, but since your soul can come here, you must be able to see the spatial cracks around you. As long as you follow my instructions and strike a point on a spatial crack, you will be able to break through the spatial barrier and reach the master of the Holy Grail unimpeded. Since the master of the Holy Grail used the Holy Grail to deal with you, it means that he will not be a match for you if he does not rely on the power of the Holy Grail. In other words, as long as you can walk in, he will be at your mercy. The consciousness inside the Holy Grail methodically analyzed the situation, clearly explaining the real situation. Han Shuo was silent for a moment. Then he suddenly transmitted, how can I trust you? It doesn't matter. If you don't believe me, when time stops and you are not here, the master of the Holy Grail can use my power to perform a short-distance spatial jump and retreat easily. While the two were communicating, some time had passed unknowingly. Han Shuo knew that if he did not make up his mind now, he would have to leave this place immediately. Otherwise, what awaited him would be the time stop, and he would be locked on by time, easily killed by the Light Pope. All right, point out the location of that spatial crack. I will break the point that maintains the balance. Han Shuo agreed after a moment's hesitation. That spatial crack has rare jade-green stripes. The jade-green stripes form a circle. As long as you strike the center of the circle, you will be able to break through the spatial barrier and come in easily. Seeing that Han Shuo had agreed, the voice inside the Holy Grail could not wait any longer and immediately relayed its instructions. After making up his mind, Han Shuo did not hesitate at all. He immediately separated a strand of consciousness and immediately followed the instructions of the Holy Grail. He began to wander around the spatial cracks that were hard to see with the naked eye. Consciousness was invisible and formless, but it truly existed. Following the instructions given by the voice of the Holy Grail, Han Shuo did not waste a second and found the spatial crack. Dazzling, multicolored rays of light appeared in front of Han Shuo's consciousness at a dark and gloomy cave entrance. This kind of light was gentle and bright, resembling the movement of stars in the vast starry sky. It appeared extremely mysterious and unfathomable. In a remote corner of the cave entrance, there was an inconspicuous crevice. Like streamers, the jade-green stripes formed an irregular arc. His consciousness paused for a moment. After Han Shuo had ascertained that this spatial crack was his target, Han Shuo's body remained motionless. Suddenly, the consciousness in his brain expanded and formed a force that shot directly at the center of the arc formed by the jade-green stripes. Swoosh! A faint, almost inaudible, strange sound came from that point. The destruction of a fulcrum had affected the entire space barrier. The barrier formed by the Edict of Space that had enveloped the Light Pontiff and the Pope of Light was now rippling violently. In an instant, all the consciousness that had been released instantly returned to Han Shuo's body. At the same time, Han Shuo, who had sensed the disappearance of the spatial barrier, did not hesitate. He shot towards the Light Pope who had suddenly stood up. A ball of icy flame immediately enveloped the Light Pope. The Light Pope's body stiffened. He maintained his standing posture, but could not move. The demigod Light Magus who had tightly grasped the olive branch was an enemy that Han Shuo wanted to get rid of, just like the Divine Knight. After restraining the Light Pope in an instant, Han Shuo easily swatted the demigod Magus with his large hand. Unlike the Light Pope, the demigod Magus who had sensed that something was amiss was still silently chanting something. He had absolutely no idea that Han Shuo had launched a fatal attack. Bam! Like a smashed watermelon, the head of the demigod Magus was smashed. Brain juices and blood spurted out. He maintained his original posture and fell limply to the ground. Unlike the Divine Knight, this Light Magus had some degree of mastery over soul energy. After his head was smashed into a smashed watermelon by Han Shuo, his soul, like the old shaman, did not dissipate. Moreover, it was struggling with all its might. Han Shuo had always been very fond of fellows whose souls did not dissipate after the death of their physical bodies. Such powerful souls were very useful. Not only could they be used to refine spiritual magic weapons, but they could also be used to refine puppets with special uses, such as mystical demons. From low to high, demon generals were divided into 4 types: original demon, demon, mystical demon, and spirit demon. After the death of the 12 mystical demons, Han Shuo did not refine any more demon generals because he wanted to refine the highest grade of spirit demon. However, this kind of spirit demon of the highest grade had the possibility of unlimited evolution. The refining conditions were also very harsh. The most basic requirement was to use a powerful soul as a primer. Even if there were millions of low-level vengeful spirits, it would still be impossible to successfully refine a spirit demon. The so-called powerful soul was a good thing that could congeal and not dissipate after the death of the physical body. After collecting the old shaman's soul, Han Shuo was already very happy. He did not expect that this demigod Magus would also have a powerful soul. Han Shuo's mood was even better. With a sinister smile, he extended his hand and flicked his finger. A black radiance floated out from his fingertip and firmly locked the soul of the demigod Magus, pulling it into the ring on his palm. Trying to run? Not so easy. Han Shuo laughed heartily and put away the ring. Chapter 621. Late-stage High God Strength. Han Shuo was greatly alarmed. It was only after his 2 avatars had cultivated to the low god realm that Han Shuo truly realized the might of a high god. To the current Han Shuo, a late-stage low god expert was simply an unimaginable expert. Han Shuo knew that even if he were to face a mid-stage low god in a one-on-one battle, let alone a late-stage low god expert, his avatar would be enough to deal with him. It was only after the 3 souls had fused into one that Han Shuo was confident of winning. High gods were truly powerful existences. Late-stage high gods were even more terrifying. They were the most powerful existences below the overgod realm. They were almost invincible existences below the overgod realm. Since Jar was a late-stage high god, the soul that he had personally sealed in the Holy Grail must be in a high realm as well. Thinking of this, Han Shuo didn't dare to rashly entertain the idea of helping him out of this predicament. If this person didn't know how to repay kindness and coveted the power of faith of this profound continent, then Han Shuo wouldn't even have the strength to retaliate. He could only look on helplessly as this person took everything he had. Why would he want to seal you? Han Shuo asked cautiously, his heart filled with anxiety. During the Battle of the Gods, as someone who cultivates the laws of space and time, I helped an old friend open up a planar passageway that connected the two battlefields. In the end, Gil lost that battle, and he was defeated. After the battle, Jar learned of my interference and despicably ambushed me with his men. He separated my divine soul from my divine body and imprisoned my soul in this Holy Grail. I don't know where he sealed my divine body, the person in the Holy Grail explained to Han Shuo in a bitter smile. Han Shuo did not know whether what he said was true or not. He was rather afraid of this person. He slowly digested the meaning behind his words and remained silent. How can you still use the Edict of Space when your divine soul and divine body are separated? Han Shuo asked in a deep voice. To Han Shuo, this unknown cultivator of the Edict of Space was extremely dangerous because he had the ability to stop time. Han Shuo would always be on guard against anyone who posed a threat to him and was not a friend. He would not do anything that he would regret in the heat of the moment. Although my divine body isn't here, this Holy Grail is special. Gil didn't want me to die, so before he imprisoned me, he left a very small portion of my divine power in the Holy Grail. On one hand, it's to maintain my soul, and on the other hand, it's to allow the owner of the Holy Grail to use a portion of my power through the light magic formation he cast on the Holy Grail. Just a small portion of his divine energy was enough to create a spatial barrier and stop time. On the other hand, the Abyss Realm could truly be considered a low-level material plane because its population exceeded 1 billion. Its land area was relatively vast, and it once had 5 demon kings of the Abyss. After hearing the person in the Holy Grail describe the profound continent as a low-level material plane, Han Shuo helplessly replied, "That's right. According to the gods' classification of material planes, this continent could barely be considered a low-level material plane because the population of this continent is less than 200 million. There are also very few low gods." Oh, since you know about the classification of material planes, it seems that you aren't an ignorant person. The soul in the Holy Grail was rather astonished. However, he did not ask Han Shuo anything but continued. "I know that you are worried that Jar might come to this material plane. You can rest assured about that. Given his identity and status as a late-stage high god, he definitely wouldn't pay attention to such a low-level material plane. Even if he had something to do, he would send his subordinates to do it. Jar must know that I'm on this material plane because he placed me here to prevent anyone from finding me. But unless he encounters something major that has to do with me, he definitely wouldn't send anyone to retrieve the Holy Grail. Therefore, you can rest assured that even if someone were to come, it definitely wouldn't be Jar." Han Shuo sneered in his heart when he heard those words. Soon after, he looked at the frozen Holy Pontiff and asked the soul in the Holy Grail, "If I were to kill the master of the Holy Grail, would it affect you in any way?" "Not at all. Just do as you please. This guy is very annoying. All these years, he has been trying to get the profound truths of the Edict of Space and Time from me. He even ludicrously promised me great benefits. Haha, he's just a puny base god. What kind of benefits could he possibly give me?" Han Shuo stretched out his hand and pressed it on the Holy Pontiff's head. Then, he sent out a secret energy from his palm and turned the Holy Pontiff's brain into mush. Just like the old shaman, the Holy Pontiff's soul was very powerful. His soul would not dissipate even after death. Therefore, his soul was naturally collected by Han Shuo. The Holy Grail, the olive branch on the Holy Grail, the radiant crown, the cross, their robes, space rings, the bone necklace worn by the old orc shaman, and other things that Han Shuo found useful were all plundered by Han Shuo. The party that attacked the academy was all killed by Han Shuo. Not a single one was spared. Apart from the so-called saintess who seemed to be unable to leave the sacred mountain, the Church of Light's most powerful experts were all killed by Han Shuo. It seemed that in the entire profound continent, only the primordious dragon could contend against him. What about you? Chapter 622. None of the six who came to attack Lancelot Empire survived. Han Shuo could be considered to have avenged the civilians of Asen City who died in the Radiant Blast. More than half of the divine weapons of the Church of Light were plundered by Han Shuo. The soul of the Light Pope was also imprisoned by Han Shuo. From then on, apart from the saintess on the sacred mountain of the Church of Light, the vast Church of Light no longer had any experts available. What delighted Han Shuo the most was the soul inside the Holy Grail. As an interplanar wanderer who cultivated in the Edict of Space, he must be very familiar with the affairs of the major material planes. With the help of that person, Han Shuo's understanding of the vast universe would no longer be that of a blind man groping an elephant. Han Shuo casually wiped away the six corpses. Han Shuo unfolded his consciousness and carefully sensed the situation in the surroundings. He found nothing out of the ordinary. After storing the Holy Grail, Han Shuo suddenly moved. He turned into a faint shadow and returned to the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force in the north of Asen City. Han Shuo's body moved, but before he could fly 1,000 meters, he discovered that little skeleton was rushing over on his bone dragon. During the battle just now, as Han Shuo had heard the words of the person inside the Holy Grail, he was afraid that Little Skull would also suffer if time was locked. Therefore, he used the soul connection with Little Skull to let Little Skull temporarily stay at the city gate. After the Light Pope was subdued by Han Shuo did not send any message to Little Skull. Therefore, he stayed there and did not move. Little Skull waited for a while. When he did not receive any message from Han Shuo, he was somewhat worried about Han Shuo. Without waiting for Han Shuo to give any further orders, he quickly rushed over. After Little Skull became a god, Han Shuo could no longer use necromancy to restrain him. The reason why Little Skull and Han Shuo still obeyed Han Shuo after becoming a god was because the two of them had unknowingly established a bond that was stronger than the power of the contract. Therefore, the Little Skull could not disobey Han Shuo's orders. Once the Little Skull felt that Han Shuo was in danger, it would ignore its previous orders when it was worried about Han Shuo. As soon as the Little Skull saw that Han Shuo was safe and sound, he immediately sent a message, "Father, are you all right?" "Hee, it's nothing. I forgot to tell you in advance." "All right, you don't have to worry. I'm done here, so I'll send you off." Han Shuo replied with a smile as he used a necromancy spell to send the Little Skull back to the Netherworld. In the Netherworld, the Little Skull still had a lot of things to take care of. Not only did he have to expand his territory in the Netherworld, but he also needed to take over the faith of the undead creatures that he had subdued. Moreover, there were many secrets within the gravestone that the Little Skull had yet to unravel. Therefore, unless something major happened, Han Shuo would not waste the Little Skull's time. The Little Skull vanished in a flash of strange light. Han Shuo continued to fly towards the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. After a few minutes, Han Shuo, who had not been gone for long, once again landed on the plaza of the academy. Ermite Cotton and Gree were silently waiting for the dignitaries of the Empire on the plaza. With just a glance, Han Shuo knew that there were no more attacks after he left. The reason the dignitaries of the Empire did not leave immediately was that they were scared out of their wits by the Radiant Blast just now. They thought that Han Shuo was in the vicinity and therefore stayed here, hoping to receive Han Shuo's protection. The tragic scene caused by the Radiant Blast was still there. Many people outside could only watch helplessly as their loved ones were turned into ashes by the Radiant Blast. They were still weeping loudly. These dignitaries of the Empire did not dare to step out of the perimeter. King Lawrence's expression was calm. He seemed to have forgotten about the danger that had just occurred. At this moment, he was wearing a bitter smile as he listened to Ferenza's complaints. Fanny, who was dressed in formal attire, had a serene expression on her face. The corners of her mouth curved into a faint smile as she watched her father pressuring Lawrence. She complained about the hardships of the people of the southern border and insisted that Lawrence give more compensation to the soldiers. Over the past few years, the Lancelot Empire's treasury had been emptied due to the successive wars. Lawrence simply could not fork out that many gold coins. However, he also understood Firenze's difficulties. He understood that as the barrier of the empire, the soldiers of the southern border had indeed sacrificed a lot of their lives. Lawrence could only force a smile as he listened to Firenze's complaints and demands. He clearly explained the current difficulties of the Lancelot Empire. I don't care. The people of the southern border have sacrificed tens of thousands of lives for the safety of the empire. After so many years of war, orphans and widows can be seen everywhere. Many people don't even have enough to eat. If the empire cannot solve the most basic problem of food and clothing in the southern border, how can the masses be convinced? Firenze glared at Lawrence. He did not have the timidity that a subordinate should have. In the entire Lancelot Empire, Firenze was perhaps the only person who dared to yell at Lawrence in such a manner. Han Shuo could use his own power to make Lawrence change his decision, but he would not yell in such an ungentlemanly manner. Although Lawrence was being yelled at by Firenze, he did not get angry. That was because he understood Firenze's importance to the Lancelot Empire better than anyone else. He also understood Firenze's loyalty to the empire. Back when his father was still alive, Firenze had been like this. This temper could not be changed at all. Now that the relationship between Fanny and Han Shuo had been confirmed, Lawrence needed to rely on Firenze even more. Firenze's request was also reasonable. If the treasury was full, Lawrence would have distributed the compensation without Firenze's request. However, he really did not have any money. No matter how much Firenze yelled, Lawrence would not be able to produce any gold coins. All right, stop yelling. Lawrence really does not have any money. It's useless even if you yell yourself hoarse. Han Shuo's lazy voice suddenly sounded. As soon as his voice faded, Han Shuo appeared out of thin air beside Fanny. No one clearly saw how he appeared. Brian, what's going on? Are you all right? Lawrence hastily asked as soon as he saw Han Shuo appear. Han Shuo smiled faintly and said in a relaxed manner, I'm fine. I just took a stroll outside the city and took care of a few scoundrels. Is it someone from the Church of Light? Candide appeared from an unknown corner and asked in a gloomy voice. As soon as he said that, everyone's gazes suddenly focused on Han Shuo, waiting for Han Shuo's explanation on the matter. Nodding his head, Han Shuo said lazily, That's right. Moreover, the Light Pope personally took action. He must have been forced into a corner. He knew that after the Shrine of Ice was destroyed, the next target would be their Church of Light. Therefore, he took the initiative to attack us first. Do you know where the attacker is? Since he dares to come to our Lancelot Empire alone, we can't let him leave so easily, Candide asked sinisterly, his eyes filled with dense killing intent. The attack on the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force made Candide feel extremely humiliated. He had indeed received news of the attack beforehand. However, even though he had made so many preparations, he was still unable to nip the problem in the bud. The attack still happened. This caused Candide to blame himself very much. Therefore, he was eager to redeem himself. Han Shuo shrugged his shoulders and smiled mischievously. He took out the light crown that the Light Pope always wore, as well as the cross and the Church of Light's Holy Grail, the olive branch that represented God's will. Under the dumbfounded gazes of the crowd, Han Shuo calmly said, There were a total of 6 attackers. Among them were 2 sacred magi of the Shrine of Ice, an old shaman with demigod strength from the Orc Empire, a divine knight and a demigod magus from the Church of Light, and the terrifyingly powerful Light Pope. However, they are all dead. Not a single one managed to escape. Therefore, there's no need to waste energy on them. The entire place fell into a deathly silence. Everyone stared at Han Shuo dumbfoundedly. Even their breathing seemed to have stopped. No one said a word. It was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. They knew that Han Shuo was very powerful. This was vaguely evident from the rumor that Han Shuo had slaughtered hundreds of thousands of orcs with his undead creatures at South Border City and destroyed the Shrine of Ice. However, they had no idea just how powerful Han Shuo actually was. However, at this moment, after listening to Han Shuo's languid speech, everyone could roughly guess just how powerful Han Shuo was. 2 sacred magi, 3 demigod experts, and the Light Pope who was practically invincible on Profound Continent. Every single one of the 6 was a legendary character. Some of the demigods were even experts who were said to be invincible. Yet, these incomparably powerful existences were all killed by Han Shuo alone in the short span of half an hour. What did this mean? Invincible, true god. This was the definition of Han Shuo in the crowd's hearts. Why aren't you saying anything? Han Shuo couldn't help but laugh. He shook his head and said to Lawrence, I told you that I would help you unify Profound Continent. If I didn't have some strength, how would I dare to make such a big statement? Lawrence, who had a lifeless face, finally came to his senses after hearing Han Shuo's words. He looked at Han Shuo with a bitter smile and said, Brian, sometimes I feel that you aren't a human at all. The things that happen to you are always so unimaginable. Doesn't this mean that you are even more powerful than the founding hero, Forefather Ermite Cotton? Old Han was either too excited or stunned by the fact that he had guessed. His body was trembling as though he was having an epileptic fit. His fingers were tightly clenching his thighs and his face was in pain. Upon hearing his words, Han Shuo smiled again. Soon after, he raised his head and looked at Ermite Cotton, who was hiding in the shadow of the clock tower. He knew that Ermite Cotton could hear the conversation below and found old Han's words very interesting. You can say that, but be careful. Forefather Ermite Cotton will be angry if he hears you say that. Han Shuo winked at the clock tower and said to old Han with a grin, Forefather has disappeared for more than 500 years. He's definitely long gone. Haha, he can't hear us, old Han said carelessly. That might not be the case, Han Shuo thought to himself. Soon after, he tossed all the divine weapons of the Church of Light, excluding the Holy Grail, to Firenze and said smilingly, Weren't you complaining about being poor? Sell these things, it'll be enough for you to rebuild 2 armies at the southern border. These so-called divine weapons of light were of no use to Han Shuo. None of his friends cultivated in the elemental energy of light. They were useless to him. Chapter 623. These so-called sacred weapons were of no use to Han Shuo. However, on Profound Continent, those who would be interested in these items would be as numerous as the school of carps in the river. They would scramble to snatch them. Firenze's eyes were lifeless. He hugged the sacred weapons of the Church of Light and was momentarily at a loss as to what to do. He knew that if he were to auction these items, he would be able to obtain a lot of profit. However, the sacred weapons in his hands originated from the Church of Light. If they were to be leaked out, the Church of Light would definitely do everything in their power to retrieve them. Han Shuo had even gotten rid of the Light Pope. The Lancelot Empire and the Church of Light would definitely not rest until one of them was dead. If the Church of Light were to obtain these sacred weapons from Han Shuo, it would undoubtedly be a great boost to the Church. Brian, forget it. Let's not sell these sacred weapons, Lawrence suddenly said with a troubled expression. Han Shuo shot a glance at Lawrence with a smile that wasn't a smile and leisurely said, Don't worry. Even if the Church of Light were to use gold coins to retrieve these items, there's nothing to fear. Even the Light Pope was killed by me with these items in his hands. What kind of waves can the others cause? That's not what I meant. Lawrence laughed involuntarily. He pointed at Amy's beside him and said to Han Shuo, Why don't you take a look at Amy's? Han Shuo was stunned and immediately turned to look at Amy's. Amy's eyes flickered and focused on the sacred weapons of the Church of Light in Firenze's hands. His mouth moved as though he wanted to say something, but he hesitated and did not speak. With just a glance, Han Shuo immediately understood and cursed himself. He knew that he had overlooked one point. Amy's cultivated in light magic. Amy's was Han Shuo's brother-in-law. Although Han Shuo did not have a deep friendship with him, Emily was his younger sister. Back then, before Han Shuo became famous, Ames had helped Han Shuo a lot. Although Han Shuo did not place these sacred weapons of the Church of Light in his eyes, to Ames, they were unimaginably attractive. Oh, look at how stupid I am. I almost forgot that Mr. Ames also cultivates light magic. Han Shuo fiercely slapped his head and pretended to be enlightened. He said to Firenze, "Well, we should keep the goodies within the family. Let's give this to Mr. Ames." Ames, who had been hesitating on whether or not he should speak, hurriedly waved his hands when he heard Han Shuo's words. "It's too valuable, too valuable. This won't do." Firenze held these sacred weapons that could be exchanged for enormous benefits for the southern border. He looked at Han Shuo and then at Ames, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. "Father." Fanny, who was beside Firenze, coughed lightly. Sigh. Firenze let out a sigh and reluctantly handed the item over to Ames. He snorted and said, "Your luck is really King good. This is a fortune that can be used to form 2 legions. Yet, it was obtained by you just like that. How can I accept it? How can I accept it?" Ames excitedly rubbed his hands. His handsome and refined face was filled with an uncontrollable smile. Although he said that he was embarrassed, he had already spread his hands apart. Forget it if you're embarrassed. Firenze despised hypocritical people the most. In addition to the anger in his heart, just as the sacred weapons were about to fall into Ames' open hands, his expression suddenly turned serious and he actually withdrew them. Ames spread his hands apart and looked at Firenze in extreme embarrassment. He scratched his head and laughed awkwardly. He randomly said, "This, that." No one knew what he was trying to express. When Fanny saw that Firenze was deliberately teasing Ames, she could not help but laugh. The others could also see that Firenze was deliberately teasing Ames because he was angry and could not help but laugh. All right. I will get Jack to give you some compensation money. Don't be so petty." Han Shuo smiled at Firenze and said loudly, "Say so earlier." Firenze muttered and heavily smashed the few treasures into Ames' palm. He snorted and said, "You hypocrites are the most annoying. You obviously want it, but still pretend to be sincere." Ames awkwardly smiled and did not say anything. The treasures in his hand had diluted all the unhappiness in his heart. He also knew Ames' character and naturally would not bear a grudge over such a small matter. "Brian, give me at least 1.5 million gold coins. Otherwise, I won't allow Fanny to enter your house." Firenze rolled his eyes at Ames and laughed sinisterly as he threatened Han Shuo. "Father." When Fanny heard Firenze's words, she glared at him and shouted angrily. Firenze was not afraid of anything except Fanny. When she shouted, he immediately shrunk his head. However, his gaze was still fixed on Han Shuo. For the millions of soldiers and civilians in the southern border, Firenze could even throw away his old face. No problem. Han Shuo knew of Firenze's painstaking efforts for the people of the southern border. He was also somewhat touched and straightforwardly agreed. Although Han Shuo had not been in Bretel City for a long time, he was still very clear about the financial situation of Bretel City. In the past 5 years, Bretel City had not experienced any war and had been painstakingly managing various high-profit industries. It was truly overflowing with wealth. Due to the special circumstances of the Lancelot Empire, even Lawrence had no way of getting Bretel City to spend the money elsewhere. Only Han Shuo could do so. To Bretel City, a mere 1.5 million gold coins was not a problem at all. Just the resources that Gree and Pegasus had plundered from the Shrine of Ice were worth more than 2 million gold coins. As for the rest of the items, if they were converted into gold coins through the Buzzed Merchant Guild, they would be worth more than 3 million gold coins. Good son-in-law, you are really straightforward. Haha, I like you more and more. Firenze immediately shouted and laughed heartily when he heard Han Shuo's cheerful agreement. All right, there should be nothing else. All right, everyone can disperse now. Han Shuo looked around and said warmly. Most of the dignitaries of the Empire, who had come to the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, had yet to recover from the shock. Each and every one of them was still incomparably excited, as they continuously pondered over the conversation between Han Shuo and Lawrence. To them, a sacred grade expert was already the pinnacle of experts on profound continent. Existences that had surpassed the sacred grade and reached the demigod realm were only heard of in legends. They had never even heard of existences that surpassed the demigod realm. When they learned that Han Shuo might have reached a terrifying realm that was unimaginable to the average person, each and every one of them had extremely complicated feelings. However, most of them were more excited than anything else because Han Shuo was a citizen of Lancelot Empire. In the midst of their shock, they vaguely saw the scene of Lancelot Empire dominating the entire profound continent. This gave them new expectations for the future, and they started to think about how they could obtain the most benefits for themselves in the upcoming upheaval of the continent. I won't say any more superfluous words. The Empire is truly blessed to have you, Lawrence said sincerely as he tightly grasped Han Shuo's hand before leaving. The Empire is also blessed to have you, Han Shuo said courteously and smilingly as he watched Lawrence and the palace guards leave. Candide stood beside Han Shuo with a gloomy face. After everyone had left, he let out a slight sigh and said, "It is indeed the Dark Mantle's dereliction of duty to not be able to nip the problem in the bud this time. You don't have to blame yourself. The ones who came this time were far more powerful than you could have imagined. Even if you weren't in charge of the Lancelot Empire's safety, you still wouldn't have been able to prevent them," Han Shuo consoled. Soon after, he smiled and said, "Moreover, didn't the Dark Mantle already reduce the damage to the minimum and punish the culprit?" "How could that be?" Candide had a puzzled look on his face. He said in a puzzled manner, "These things were all done by you. But I've always been a member of the Dark Mantle. My actions also represent the Dark Mantle's actions, don't they?" Han Shuo smiled as he looked at Candide and reminded him seriously. Candide's mood improved a bit after hearing Han Shuo's words. However, he still shook his head with a wry smile and said, "It's still not quite the same." After a pause, Candide's face suddenly turned solemn as he solemnly said to Han Shuo, "Oh right, Brian. With your contributions to the Empire, you are completely qualified to become the new ruler of the Dark Mantle. You will become the one giving orders above the 3 heavyweights of the Dark Mantle. Do you want to take over the Dark Mantle?" Han Shuo smiled and refused. "No need. The Dark Mantle is quite good in the hands of the 3 of you. If it was before, I might have been interested. But now, forget about it." "Why?" Candide asked in astonishment. Looking at Candide with a beaming smile, Han Shuo asked in reply, "Don't you think that the current Dark Mantle is a bit too small for me?" Candide was silent for a moment, then nodded in agreement. "Yes, with your current strength, the Dark Mantle is indeed a bit too small for you in the context of the entire profound continent. Sigh, I really didn't expect that you would progress so quickly as I watched you grow step by step. It's so fast that it makes one dumbfounded and dizzy. Compared to the time when you were an errant slave here, the current you has really undergone an earth-shattering change." Candide sighed endlessly. With these words, Han Shuo seemed to have returned to the past. He recalled the time when Candide hid in the darkness and lured him into the Dark Mantle. Han Shuo couldn't help but laugh involuntarily. He asked, "Right, I've always been curious. Why did you specifically seek me out and recruit me into the Dark Mantle? With your status, you shouldn't have taken a fancy to me when I was weak back then, right?" "That's because I saw ambition in your eyes. Ambition is the most important thing for anyone who wants to achieve great things. You already possessed this at that time. In addition, you also had the perseverance and willpower to put your ambition into action. This is already very rare. In addition, you were somewhat mysterious at that time. In order to better understand you, I appeared and recruited you into the Dark Mantle," Candide explained seriously. "So that's how it is." Han Shuo nodded. Soon after, he rubbed his chin and said proudly, "It seems that I have quite a few good points, he." Chapter 624. With Han Shuo's consolation, Candide was in a slightly better mood. After exchanging a few words with Dean Emma, he hurriedly went back to deal with the miscellaneous affairs. Han Shuo gestured to Gree from afar. Gree and Pegasus were the two heavyweight experts that Han Shuo had placed in the Dark Mantle. With the two of them in the Dark Mantle, some of the previously unsolvable missions would no longer be a challenge. The Dark Mantle would also be able to better serve the Lancelot Empire. The dignitaries of the various empires vanished together with Lawrence. Before they left, they expressed their sincere gratitude to Han Shuo and vaguely expressed that they would stand by Han Shuo's side no matter what. Han Shuo was well aware of what they were scheming. Today, Han Shuo had come to terms with everything. He feigned civility and politeness before sending them off one by one. Ames left with Firenze before Candide. Before leaving, Ames only took a glance at Han Shuo from afar. From his gaze, Han Shuo could understand his excitement and gratitude. Ames only left after Han Shuo nodded with a smile on his face. Han Shuo understood that after experiencing today's events, it was likely that no one in the entire Lancelot Empire would dare to go against his side before he died. As long as he was in the Lancelot Empire, not only the dignitaries of the Empire, even King Lawrence would have to act according to his wishes. There shouldn't be anyone who was reckless enough to go against his will. Everyone gradually disappeared. Han Shuo arrived at the necromancy general store that he once stayed in for a period of time. Beside him were the three goddesses of the Lancelot Empire. They listened to Han Shuo's narration of those days with a calm expression. From time to time, they would furrow their brows and purse their lips into a smile. Hee, I've always been ambitious. Power, wealth, and women were the goals I pursued in the past. Today, I have everything I should have. Thinking back to all the interesting things and ambitions I had in the past, I still feel that it was very interesting, as if it happened just yesterday. The warehouse hadn't changed much. The narrow wooden bed was still there, and the surroundings were still piled with useless materials from necromancy experiments. It looked messy and disorderly. The three goddesses that every man in Lancelot Empire yearned for even in their dreams stood side by side behind Han Shuo, looking at the wide-open wooden door of the warehouse together with him. They listened to Han Shuo's description of this place that was filled with emotions. Their hearts were at peace, and their expressions were at ease. You were very dishonest back then. Now that I think about it, it turns out that you were the one who caused so much chaos in the necromancy major. Heh. The corner of Fanny's mouth hooked into a faint smile as she recalled how Lisa had been ambushed by a little skull in the middle of the night and had chased the little skull everywhere. Then, she saw Fanny's expression change as she asked Han Shuo, "Oh right, since you've come to the academy, have you seen Lisa? She really wants to see you. I've heard her talk about you a lot these past few years." That's strange. Why hasn't Lisa been around these past 2 days? Logically speaking, she wouldn't have left if she knew that you were coming to the academy. How come I haven't seen her? Strange. I've seen her. Han Shuo looked at the warehouse in front of him and recalled all the interesting things that had happened between him and Lisa. Now that he thought about it, those things had become unforgettable memories. Just thinking about it made Han Shuo's heart happy. You've seen her? Fanny exclaimed softly, appearing a bit surprised. Coughing lightly, Han Shuo turned his head a bit awkwardly and looked at the three girls. He smiled sheepishly. There are some things that I need to explain to you. When the three girls saw Han Shuo's expression, a foreboding premonition arose in their hearts. Phoebe's face immediately darkened as she stared fiercely at Han Shuo and asked, "Explain what?" Fanny started and immediately revealed a thoughtful expression. Before Han Shuo could explain with a wry smile, she spoke first. "AI, Lisa is quite pitiful. She's been waiting for you silently all these years. Even when you've clearly expressed your rejection, she's never given up. Not to mention that when you were in the dark forest, Lisa and I were ambushed by the deep-water venomous python in the pond. You touched every inch of our bodies, and Lisa's first kiss was also stolen by you. Also, enough. What's going on?" Phoebe interrupted before Fanny could finish. She frowned at Han Shuo and asked, "Tell me, what's going on?" At that, it's just like what you're thinking. That's it. Han Shuo smiled wryly and spread his hands, no longer concealing anything. You? Why can't you get rid of this bad habit of yours? Phoebe was furious. A few days ago, Han Shuo had promised them that he wouldn't continue to flirt with other girls. He'd even said that the preposterous things in the past were caused by the special martial arts techniques he practiced. Who would have thought that such a thing would happen again after a few days? Phoebe couldn't help but be angry. Emily also sighed in her heart, but didn't say much. She was a woman who completely prioritized Han Shuo. Although she was also a little uncomfortable in her heart, she wouldn't express it in front of him. This Brian. Should I not have come? It was at this moment that a timid, low voice sounded faintly from behind the three girls. It's all right. I've asked you to come at this time so that you can see them. Han Shuo consoled softly. Seeing Lisa's timid appearance, he couldn't help but feel a little sorry for her. In these few days, because Lisa's memories had just been left in her soul by Han Shuo, her mind was in a mess. She'd been silently digesting those jumbled and enormous memories in her room. She didn't even come to the handover ceremony for Fanny to become the new dean. Before she began to sort out and digest her memories, Han Shuo had told her to come find him at this place after she had sorted everything out. Han Shuo had calculated the time and knew that Lisa would probably finish digesting her memories during this period of time. That was why he had brought Fanny and the other two girls to wait for her, all in order to properly resolve this matter. After Han Shuo's gentle consolation, Lisa still appeared a little timid. On one hand, she knew that her role wasn't honorable. On the other hand, it was because Fanny, Phoebe, and Emily were all well-known strong women in the Empire. Not only were they all valiant in strength, but they also had complicated backgrounds. After her family's fortunes declined, Lisa felt a little inferior. It was normal for her to feel inferior in front of the three most dazzling women in Lancelot Empire. This lass. When Phoebe saw that Han Shuo treated Lisa so gently, she felt angry and her attitude wasn't friendly. She shot a cold glance at Lisa and snorted, "Little lass, you're quite capable. You've charmed him in just a few days. Not simple at all." Lisa panicked and hastily waved her hands to explain. "It's not what you think. I've known Brian for a long time, even longer than you guys. What's the use of knowing him long ago? Don't think that I really don't know that you nearly caused his death back then. Now that you've seen Brian prosper, you won't let him go. Isn't that right?" Phoebe had experienced all kinds of despicable things in the business world for so many years and had mixed in her subjective imagination when looking at problems. She took it for granted that this was the case. "Phoebe, what are you saying? Lisa is my student. I know better than anyone what kind of person she is. If it was really like what you said, I would have already explained it clearly to Brian. You don't know anything. Can you not hurt him in such a short time?" Fanny felt that Phoebe's words were a little harsh. Although they were on the same side, she couldn't stand it anymore. In the past few years, Phoebe and Fanny no longer had any estrangement. Because of Han Shuo's departure, the three women often met each other. Through recounting some of the interesting things that happened between them and Han Shuo, they diluted the strong longing for Han Shuo after he was gone for a few years. Thus, their relationship had become very close. Hearing Fanny's words, Phoebe didn't refute Fanny. She only frowned and sized up Lisa. Perhaps it was because of Han Shuo's tenderness and protection for Lisa, but Phoebe found Lisa to be an eyesore no matter how she looked at it. She continued in a cold voice, "You've also seen that Brian already has the three of us. No matter what you're planning, you should know when to back off. No matter how you look at it, you're not worthy of Brian." I love him." Lisa's eyes immediately welled up with tears when she heard Phoebe's words. She stubbornly looked at Han Shuo and softly shouted, I love him." "Love? Do you know what love is?" Fanny sneered. Thinking of Han Shuo's constant fickleness, the more she thought about it, the more hatred she felt. She huffed angrily. "Any love mixed with benefits is not called love." It seemed that she didn't agree with Fanny's words. She still thought that Lisa seduced Han Shuo because she was vain because of Han Shuo's status and power. "I love him, not mixed with any benefits. Moreover, my love is not any less than yours." Lisa screamed, her eyes brimming with tears. Towards the end of her words, she could only helplessly look at Han Shuo, as if Han Shuo was the only thing that mattered. I don't believe it. Phoebe coldly snorted. I believe it. Unexpectedly, Fanny and Emily, who had been silent all this while, suddenly said in unison, You? You too? Phoebe was stunned. Shortly after, she angrily looked at Fanny and Emily. She couldn't understand why the two of them would help an outsider. Enough. Han Shua coldly snorted as he unhappily looked at Phoebe. There's no need to say anything more about this matter. Lisa will be your younger sister in the future. As her elder sister, take good care of her. Don't make things so unpleasant. The more Han Shua protected Lisa, the angrier Phoebe became. She coldly said, I don't recognize this younger sister. Compared to Emily and Fanny, Phoebe's possessiveness was too strong. She had endured her resentment for Han Shua's fickleness for too long. Finally, it exploded on the matter of Lisa. There was a limit to Han Shua's patience. Seeing Lisa crying and Phoebe being so overbearing, the domineering nature in his bones erupted. He angrily said, I don't care if you recognize me or not. If you can't stand me, then leave me. Don't criticize my decisions. The cold and arrogant Phoebe suddenly pointed a finger at Han Shua in disbelief, her voice trembling. What? What did you say? If you can't stand me, then leave. Han Shua was angry in his heart as he coldly said. He pulled the crying Lisa away, not giving Phoebe another glance. Ah, he's actually so heartless to say such things. Phoebe suddenly cried out and murmured to herself as soon as Han Shua walked away. Chapter 625. Han Shua heard Phoebe's bitter cries clearly, and his heart was a little sour. It was just that Phoebe's possessiveness was a little too strong, and what she did just now was really too much, which made him very uncomfortable. Is she okay? Lisa saw Han Shua's gloomy face and lowered his head as if he had done something wrong, and asked Han Shua in a low voice. Forcing an ugly smile, Han Shua sighed softly and comforted Lisa. It's okay. She'll be fine after crying. Fanny and Emily did not follow. Han Shua knew that the two of them were trying to persuade Phoebe with kind words. With the two of them watching over Phoebe, Han Shua felt a lot more at ease. Since getting along with the three women until now, this was the first time Han Shua got angry. This time, he also knew that he did something wrong, but he just couldn't control his temper. From the beginning with Emily, Phoebe had always been the biggest obstacle. When it came to Fanny's matter, Phoebe's outburst was also very fierce. This matter seemed to have become a habit. Once Han Shua had some problems with any woman, Phoebe would always fly into a rage because of jealousy, and he needed to constantly flatter and comfort her to beg for her understanding. The root of everything was because Phoebe's love for him was too deep, and this was something Han Shua understood in his heart. However, Phoebe's outburst again and again was a little too frequent. In addition, the current situation had already been set, and it was impossible for Han Shua to only protect Phoebe. If she was allowed to continue pestering him endlessly, not only would Han Shua be annoyed to no end, but Phoebe might also take an inch and take a mile. A man could not let a woman ride over his head forever. Usually being obedient didn't mean fear, and occasionally flying into a rage could better control the situation. If it wasn't for the fact that Phoebe's words were a little too harsh, Han Shua might have persuaded her with kind words as usual, slowly dispelling the dissatisfaction in Phoebe's heart. How about I go back and clear things up with her? Lisa was still thinking of Han Shua and felt very guilty as she looked timidly at Han Shua. Shaking his head, Han Shua smiled wryly and said, Forget it. She must find you to be an eyesore right now. I know Phoebe's stubborn temper the best. Let's let her calm down for now. Brian, I'm sorry. Lisa started, her face full of self-blame and tears welling up on her little face. Rubbing Lisa's long, silky hair, Han Shua comforted her. It's nothing to do with you. Phoebe has held it in for a long time and will explode sooner or later. This isn't a bad thing. All right, don't think too much about it. Just relax and sort out the things in your mind during this time. I also have some matters to attend to and will need to leave for a while. When I return, I'll find Phoebe and have a good talk. I think her anger will have subsided by then, and she won't continue to cause trouble. Come back soon. I'll miss you. Lisa lifted her head to look at Han Shuo and said obediently. After chatting with Lisa for a while, Han Shuo had her return to the necromancy teaching block. His consciousness circled around Phoebe's area. Seeing that Phoebe had stopped crying after being comforted by Emily and Fanny, Han Shuo felt slightly relieved and quietly left the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. After finding Ermite Cotton, Han Shuo communicated with him and left Asen City. Making use of the convenient transportation matrices in the major cities, Han Shuo quickly returned to the Cemetery of Death in the Dark Forest. Within the Cemetery of Death, his two avatars were still silently recovering from the injuries they had sustained last time. In the Cemetery of Death, where the element of death was dense, the necromancy avatar's recovery speed was a bit faster. It looked like it would be able to fully recover in no time. His avatar of destruction was a little slower, but judging from the situation, it wouldn't take long. On one hand, Han Shuo had returned to the Cemetery of Death to get a clear understanding of the situation in the lowest layer of the Cemetery of Death. On the other hand, he had collected the souls of the Light Pope and the other two. He planned to use their souls to refine a demon general of the highest grade into a spirit demon. As his avatar of death was still recovering, Han Shuo wasn't in a hurry to explore the so-called secret of becoming a god in the lowest layer of the Cemetery of Death. Instead, he started laying down the matrix to refine a spirit demon. Long before the disappearance of the 12 mystical demons, Han Shuo had been paying attention to collecting the materials needed to refine a spirit demon. Back in the Abyss realm, Han Shuo had obtained a large number of rare and exotic treasures. In addition to the many years of harvesting on Profound Continent, he had gathered all the materials needed to refine a spirit demon. The reason why he hadn't started yet was that he still lacked the most important, powerful souls. Now that he had the souls of the Light Pope, the Old Shaman, and the demigod Magus, Han Shuo could finally start. According to the memories in his head, Han Shuo first carved out a complicated diagram of a matrix on the empty ground in front of the Cemetery of Death. Shortly after, he summoned Earth Elite Zombie and had him cut the ground neatly according to the diagram on the empty ground. After these initial arrangements were in place, Han Shuo started to pour in a large amount of the required materials. On the potholed ground, he placed all kinds of strange and bizarre materials. 3 oval grooves were located at the 3 corners of the matrix. Bloody bubbles were bubbling from the grooves, filling the air with a pungent stench. Han Shuo walked to the edge of the first groove, broke his middle finger, and dripped 3 drops of his blood essence into the groove. Due to the 3 drops of blood essence, the bubbling grooves were like boiling water that suddenly boiled. Multicolored smoke rose in spirals from the grooves, but gathered half a meter above the grooves. It was a very strange sight. After that, Han Shuo also dripped 3 drops of his blood essence into the other 2 grooves. They melted into the bloody bubbles and formed a strange fog that didn't disperse. Sitting on a raised platform at the center of the matrix, Han Shuo pressed both his hands on the smooth and translucent magical guiding stone on the platform. An enormous amount of demonic yuan suddenly gushed out, directly pouring into the magical guiding stone. In an instant, the magical guiding stone exploded with dazzling demonic light. The dozens of fine grooves connected to the magical guiding stone started to writhe like living snakes and started glowing together. Looking down from above, those fine grooves seemed to form a drifting spider web, swaying and twisting in various poses. It was a different kind of enchanting beauty. Those grooves were like a channel that transported some kind of liquid. Through the magical guiding stone, with Han Shuo's demonic yuan as the primer, the various energies contained within the grooves gathered midway, and finally converged into the 3 grooves where Han Shuo had dripped his blood essence. The Cemetery of Death couldn't see the sun or the moon, and thus didn't have a clear sense of time. After an unknown amount of time, the magical guiding stone gradually lost its brilliance. On the contrary, the 3 grooves that were the source of gathering energies were bubbling with bloody bubbles. The strange fog that didn't disperse emitted a strong, colorful light. It looked very sinister. Han Shuo, who had been sitting on the magical guiding stone all this time, suddenly stood up and flew above the first groove. He carefully took out the ring and grabbed the soul of the weakest demigod Magus. With lightning speed, he shot it into the fog above the first groove. In an instant, the thick fog seemed to boil and emit a dazzling light. A ghostly wail and wolf-like howl suddenly rang out from within. Han Shuo had a callous expression on his face. With a sway of his body, he arrived above the next groove. He pulled out the old shaman's soul and threw it into the thick fog above. When Han Shuo threw the light Supreme Pontiff's soul into the thick fog above the last groove, the entire matrix seemed to have come alive. It was as if it had become a monster with 3 eyes. Those fine grooves seemed to have become densely packed scars on the monster's face, twisting and wriggling like earthworms. It was an extremely terrifying sight. 3 mournful wails that didn't sound like human wails came from the fog above the 3 grooves. They continued to create terrifying noises. Han Shuo didn't even crease his brows. He once again landed on the central platform and sat down cross-legged. He pressed his hands on the magical guiding stone once more and poured out the demonic yuan in his body, providing the 3 spirit demons with the power to evolve for the first time. Another long period of time passed by unknowingly. The continuous and terrifying sound waves had been shouted for thousands of times, and finally, it gradually calmed down. On the platform, Han Shuo revealed a rather tired expression. He slowly opened his eyes and glanced at the 3 spirit demons that had fallen into hibernation. He then slowly stood up from his cross-legged position. After taking a deep breath, Han Shuo no longer paid any attention to the slowly evolving spirit demons. He flew to the center of the cemetery of death, took out a few finger-sized medicinal pellets from his space ring, and swallowed them without chewing. His main body then sat down next to the large-scale interplanar transportation matrix in the cemetery of death and began to regulate his breathing. Not too far away from Linley, his necromancy avatar, who had been sitting there for God knows how long, suddenly opened its eyes at this moment. It stretched comfortably, twisted its somewhat stiff arms and neck, and revealed a satisfied smile. Soon after, it walked towards the bottom of the cemetery of death. After a period of recuperation, his avatar of the element of death had finally made a full recovery. It felt even better than before the battle at the Shrine of Ice. It had also gained a deeper understanding of the elemental energy. Because this soul possessed the memories of a mid-god, it had a very deep understanding of the elemental energy of death. However, knowledge was one thing. It was still different when it came to using it. The precious experience gained from the battle with that god from the Shrine of Ice had significantly improved Han Shuo's control of the elemental energy. Although this avatar of his had suffered serious injuries in that battle, the gains he had reaped were far greater than the losses he had sustained. After the battle, by relying on his new understanding of the elemental energy, Han Shuo had a feeling that he could rapidly make a breakthrough to the mid-stage low-god realm. This made Han Shuo extremely excited. A mid-stage low-god would definitely be much stronger than an early-stage low-god. Not only would one's understanding of the elemental energy improve, but even one's strength and domain of divinity would be greatly enhanced. Chapter 626. Step by step, he made his way to the bottom of the cemetery of death. The boundaries that previously had some effect on Han Shuo were no longer of any use. Han Shuo walked unimpeded all the way to the entrance of the last layer of the boundary before stopping for a moment. It wasn't that this layer of boundary could obstruct Han Shuo in any way. It was just that Han Shuo habitually paused for a moment before gazing at the boundary in front of him. He attached his soul to the boundary and carefully sensed it for a moment. After becoming a low god, Han Shuo didn't have much expectations for the so-called secrets of becoming a god in the next layer. The trip to the Abyss realm allowed Han Shuo to more or less guess the contents of the secrets of becoming a god below. Since he himself had become a low god twice, the secrets of becoming a god naturally didn't hold much interest for him. The reason why Han Shuo still wanted to explore was that entering the next layer of the Cemetery of Death had always been a wish of his. Han Shuo also wanted to see if there was anything else that could tempt him apart from the secrets of becoming a god that he no longer valued. The boundary in front of him was formed purely from mental strength. After obtaining the divine soul of a mid-god, Han Shuo recognized the function and layout of this boundary at a glance. Instead of trying to force his way in like he did in the past, Han Shuo merely stretched out his hand and pressed it on the invisible boundary. His mental strength moved, and his entire body melted into the boundary like water. He didn't cause any strong backlash from the boundary. After walking into the last layer of the Cemetery of Death, Han Shuo looked around and discovered that there was only a rhombus-shaped mirror in the center. A simple magical matrix for storing mental strength was drawn on the back of the mirror. Other than that, there was nothing of value in the surroundings, causing Han Shuo to feel somewhat disappointed. With just a glance at the rhombus-shaped mirror, Han Shuo understood that it was also a special device for leaving messages. He walked to the front of the rhombus-shaped mirror and pressed his hand on it. The aura from the skeletal staff in his body surged into the mirror, and the rhombus-shaped mirror instantly lit up. A blurry silhouette emerged from the rhombus-shaped mirror. A familiar voice sounded from the center of the mirror. "My child, I'm very happy that you have reached this step. Reaching this point also means that you are already a sacred magus. This is very good. But let me tell you, sacred magus, in our eyes, is just the beginning. What I am about to tell you next is the so-called secret of becoming a god. Remember it carefully." Just as Han Shuo had expected, the information left in the mirror for who knew how long didn't contain much new information. The secret of becoming a god was precisely the method of fusing the soul, the physical body, and the elements that Han Shuo had comprehended long ago. However, the explanation was a little more detailed. His understanding of this matter was indeed deeper than Han Shuo's, and he could be considered to have given Han Shuo some inspiration. The message on the mirror was fixed and would be triggered as soon as Han Shuo came over. Therefore, Han Shuo stood there motionlessly, quietly listening to the message. After explaining the secret of becoming a god, the voice didn't stop immediately and continued. As long as you can remember all of this and truly comprehend it, becoming a god isn't a difficult matter. But if you want to go a step further and obtain a higher level of power, then follow the method I've told you. Take my skeletal staff as a keepsake and find the dark dragons in the underground world. Ask them about the path to the deepest part of the underground world and enter the underground world. You will reap new rewards there. The Cemetery of Death isn't just a place to hide. It also has a few methods of attack. Firstly, the skeletal staff contains a deeper level of my understanding of the energy of death and some tentative knowledge of the planes. If you can grasp it, perhaps we will have the opportunity to meet again. Finally, I wish you good luck. The shadow in the rhombus mirror flickered and dimmed until it finally shattered, leaving behind a pile of fragments. As Han Shuo had already become a god, he wasn't particularly excited about the message on the mirror. After listening to all the messages left behind by that person, Han Shuo smiled wryly and shook his head. He really didn't discover anything that particularly excited him. The only thing that puzzled Han Shuo was the message regarding the lowest layer of the underground world. According to that person, the lowest layer of the underground world contained a method that could allow gods to advance further. This rather surprised Han Shuo. He still remembered that the dark dragons had been ambushed by the experts of the Shrine of Ice, led by Ice Celestial Kori, in order to interrogate them about the path to the lowest layer of the underground world. Back then, he had communicated with the Patriarch of the Dark Dragons, Gilgs, and learned that the Dark Dragons had indeed been instructed by the Master of the Skeletal Staff to guard that place all along in order to preserve the path to the lowest layer of the underground world. Come to think of it this way, the lowest layer of the underground world might really have some miraculous aspects. Otherwise, those from the Shrine of Ice wouldn't have ventured thousands of miles deep into the underground world, and the Master of the Skeletal Staff wouldn't have been so concerned about that place. Perhaps it was because his strength had advanced by leaps and bounds, but Han Shuo was less excited about many things. When he went through all the information in his mind, he was somewhat at a loss as to what to do. Walking to the interplanar transportation matrix above the Cemetery of Death, Han Shuo's avatar of death sat down on the ground, took out a divine essence of death he obtained from the abyss, and silently digested the elemental energy of death within. This divine essence of death was extremely precious. It wasn't easy for Han Shuo to obtain it. It was greatly beneficial to the advancement of his divine energy. Han Shuo treasured it very much. Before heading to the headquarters of the Calamity Church, Han Shuo prepared to unite his 3 souls and depart together. At this time, his avatar of destruction had yet to recover, and his main body had consumed a great deal of demonic yuan to refine spirit demons. He too needed some time to recover. As such, his avatar of death could make use of this period of time to absorb the divine essence of death and comprehend the experience gained from the last great battle. Inside the cemetery of death, all 3 of Han Shuo's bodies sat cross-legged in silence. They were either recovering their strength or comprehending greater power. Time flew by unknowingly. After an unknown period of time, when all 3 of his bodies had recovered, Han Shuo finally left the cemetery of death. The 3 spirit demons in the center were still in the midst of hibernation and evolution. Han Shuo knew that because spirit demons had the characteristic of evolving continuously, they would take much longer to refine than the other demon generals. After their evolution was complete, they would be eagerly waiting for Han Shuo to collect them. Han Shuo didn't need to keep watch over them all the time, so he left with peace of mind. Han Shuo didn't know how long he stayed in the cemetery of death. After walking out of the cemetery of death, Han Shuo returned to Asan City. This time, Han Shuo didn't alert anyone. Upon arriving at Asan City, he immediately left a mark to contact Wolf. Wolf had probably been waiting for news from Han Shuo all along. Wolf had come looking for him not long after Han Shuo left the mark. "Lord Brian, where have you been? Why did you disappear for more than a month?" Wolf immediately inquired when he saw Han Shuo. "Oh, nothing much. I just cultivated for a period of time," Han Shuo replied with a smile. "I didn't expect Lord Brian to be so powerful and still cultivate so hard." "It's really admirable," Bert Zeely, who came with Wolf, said sincerely as he looked at Han Shuo with a face full of admiration. "My lord, His Holiness the Pope has urged you several times. If you still don't come with us to the headquarters, His Holiness the Pope might personally come over," Wolf said hastily. "Oh? Why is he suddenly in such a hurry?" Previously, Wolf had said that the Pope of the Calamity Church told them not to be anxious. Now that Wolf had suddenly become impatient, Han Shuo was somewhat puzzled. After Lord Brian killed the Light Pope and the 2 demigods, it caused a huge commotion in the headquarters. His Holiness the Pope and all the cardinals were wild with joy and urgently wanted to thank Lord Brian in person. Lord Brian's actions were truly too dazzling. Before Wolf could speak, Bert Zeely rushed to speak first. Han Shuo was speechless. He smilingly looked at Bert Zeely, who had a face full of admiration, and then looked at Wolf, who was equally excited. He opened his mouth and said, "In that case, did you take the opportunity to launch a fatal attack on the Church of Light?" Of course. When talking about this matter, Wolf couldn't conceal the excitement in his heart. He cheerfully said, "Because of Lord Brian's heroic deeds, in addition to Lancelot Empire's strong condemnation of the Church of Light, the reputation of the Church of Light on the continent has plummeted. Even the Light Pope has been killed by Lord Brian. The morale of the Church of Light has reached an unprecedented low. Of course, we won't let go of this opportunity to beat them when they are down. In just over a month's time, we have destroyed more than 100 churches of the Church of Light in various countries and killed thousands of their believers. Haha, this is great. If this trend continues, it won't be long before our Calamity Church will no longer have to hide in secret and can openly preach our doctrines in every continent." After hearing Wolf's words, Han Shuo was very happy. Perhaps it was because he cultivated in the elemental energy of death and the edict of destruction, but Han Shuo was very disgusted with the Church of Light from the very beginning. The Church of Light also viewed him as the greatest heretic on Profound Continent and had once tried to exterminate him at all costs. When he was homeless in the Abyss Realm, Han Shuo swore that he would utterly destroy the Church of Light. Now that he heard from Wolf about the miserable state of the Church of Light, Han Shuo was naturally very happy. This is all thanks to Lord Brian. Without Lord Brian's heroic deeds of killing the Light Pope and the 2 demigods, The Church of Light would never have dared to attack the Church of Light with such great fanfare. Only a character like your lordship could cause a major power like the Church of Light to decline with a single blow. This lowly one simply doesn't know how to express my admiration for your lordship. Bert Zeely flattered Han Shuo with a fawning smile, shamelessly flattering him. That's enough. Han Shuo was also a man of vanity. He was very pleased by the flattery and laughed heartily. Soon after, he straightforwardly said, "Let's go. I will accompany you to the headquarters." Chapter 627. In the vast Tukla Desert in the northwest of the Angela Empire, there were flocks of vultures. There were no signs of human habitation. The Tukla Desert was a vast expanse of yellow sand. Even the greediest caravan wouldn't dare to roam in this place. The vultures that survived by feeding on corpses had been starving for a long time. Each and every one of them was emaciated from hunger. Their eyes were filled with an ominous glint of hunger, thirst, and madness as they circled around. A sandstorm whizzed past, filling the sky with sand and shrouding a vast area in a hazy yellow mist. The densely packed ants gathered in groups and devoured all living creatures. Some magical beasts that appeared in the desert couldn't escape the corrosion of those ants. Wherever they passed, they would turn into ghastly white skeletons. It was a very ghastly sight. Along the way, there were all kinds of white bones of all kinds of strange and ferocious beasts. There were unknown dangers everywhere. Walking on foot was a rule of the Calamity Church. Han Shuo had his own plans for coming to the Calamity Church this time. Therefore, he completely abided by the rules of the Calamity Church. He followed behind Wolf and Bert Zeely and did not fly. Instead, he walked deep into the desert. Starving vultures circled above the three of them. One of the vultures that couldn't take it anymore would dive down and turn into ashes in a flash of light. However, even so, those hungry vultures didn't leave. Perhaps they had indeed gone mad from hunger. They followed closely behind Han Shuo's group of three. These vultures are really annoying. You've already killed 7 of them along the way, but they still don't know what's good for them, Han Shuo said indifferently as he raised his head to look at the boundless sky above. My lord, you might not know this, but the corpses of merchants are the main source of food for these vultures in the Tukla Desert. However, due to the worsening environment of the Tukla Desert, there are simply too many dangers. Even the greediest merchants don't dare to come from the Tukla Desert. These vultures haven't had corpses to eat for a long time and have almost gone mad from hunger. Now that they've finally seen us, it would be strange if they didn't go crazy. Bert Zeely smiled and explained to Han Shuo in a flattering manner. I didn't expect the Calamity Church to be in the depths of the desolate Tukla Desert. Hee, no wonder so many forces on the continent couldn't find you. Han Shuo sighed with emotion. Ever since they entered the Tukla Desert, they had been bombarded with all kinds of attacks. Han Shuo had a deep understanding of the instability of the Tukla Desert. He felt that the Calamity Church had indeed chosen a good place. There's something you don't know, sir. Although the Tukla Desert was mysterious in the past, it wasn't as dangerous as it is now. It's just that since our church's headquarters is here, we naturally don't want people with ulterior motives to know about it, nor do we want them to come in. Therefore, most of the man-eating ants, bloodthirsty wasps, and these ferocious mutated desert scorpions that you've seen along the way were intentionally created by us after we entered the Tukla Desert. With so many dangers lurking everywhere, even the greediest merchant caravans wouldn't dare to take the risk. Even if some countries knew of our location, due to the unique environment here, they wouldn't be able to mobilize their armies to encircle and annihilate us. After all, the Tukla Desert is too vast. Once an army enters, they won't be able to obtain sufficient supplies. Besides, there are so many terrifying flora and fauna in the desert. Han Shuo nodded in understanding. As the owner of the skeletal staff, Han Shuo was well aware of some of the past events that happened hundreds of years ago. He knew that the Calamity Church once did some crazy things and became the public enemy of the entire Profound Continent. At that time, all the countries on the Profound Continent wished to annihilate the Calamity Church as soon as possible. Therefore, The Calamity Church had no choice but to go into hiding. As the public enemy of the entire profound continent, if the Calamity Church's headquarters were to be discovered, they would very likely face the combined forces of all the countries on the profound continent. It was indeed necessary for them to so cautiously establish their headquarters in the Tukla Desert and go through so much trouble to create so many dangers. Otherwise, they might have been finished long ago. However, the situation on the continent is different now. Some countries with ulterior motives have formed inextricable relationships with us over the years. Even if the headquarters of our Calamity Church were to be exposed, there wouldn't be too many countries that would participate in the crusade against us, except for those countries that believe in the God of Light that the Church of Light secretly supports, Wolf said proudly. The Church of Light should know of your location, right? Asked Han Shuo. The two churches were mortal enemies. Given the Church of Light's influence on the profound continent, there was no way they wouldn't know of the Calamity Church's location. That's right, the Church of Light does know that we are in the Tukla Desert. However, just like how we don't dare to attack the sacred mountain of the Church of Light, they also don't dare to wantonly attack the Tukla Desert. This stalemate has lasted for hundreds of years, Wolf explained smilingly. The Tukla Desert has been under our control for so many years and is filled with all kinds of dangers. A large-scale attack would only be asking for trouble. If it were just a few experts invading, given the strength of our church, we wouldn't be afraid of them. Therefore, even though they clearly know that we are here, they don't dare to come. So that's how it is. It seems that your Calamity Church is indeed very powerful. The only power on the profound continent that can make the Church of Light feel apprehensive is your church. Han Shuo nodded and praised. Hehe, my lord, you are wrong. It should be our Calamity Church. Ever since the skeletal staff appeared in your hands, the people of the church have treated you as one of their own. Whether you admit it or not, you are a member of our Calamity Church. Even the Church of Light thinks so. Bert Zeely mischievously laughed and said to Han Shuo in a crafty manner. He appeared to be very proud of himself. The corners of Han Shuo's mouth twitched. He didn't comment on Bert Zeely's words and didn't express any opinion. As many of the dangers in the Tukla Desert were deliberately set up by the Calamity Church, the most terrifying man-eating ants and bloodthirsty bees along the way were all repelled by Wolf and Bert Zeely's bizarre incense. Along the way, some magical beasts that suddenly emerged from the sand dunes were nightmarish for merchants. Not to mention existences at Han Shuo's level, even Wolf didn't need to exert much strength to deal with them. Although there were many dangers along the way, Han Shuo's party of 3 was unimpeded. Braving the scorching sun and treading on the scalding sand, they walked step by step towards the depths of the Tukla Desert. Although the 3 of them walked on foot, their speed was faster than an average person running at full speed. They admired the desolate and magnificent scenery of the desert and occasionally inquired about some secrets of the Calamity Church. At night, when the cold wind was whistling, Han Shuo and Wolf stopped on a huge, uneven sand dune. Why did you stop? Han Shuo asked in puzzlement when he saw that Wolf and Bert Zeely had stopped moving. At a glance, all Han Shuo could see were undulating sand dunes of various sizes. There was nothing special about them. We've arrived. Wolf smiled and explained to Han Shuo. Knitting his brows, Han Shuo, who had been relaxing and enjoying the beautiful scenery, suddenly felt his consciousness tighten. He suddenly chuckled and nodded, saying, So it's underground. I can sense a lot of life auras underground. It seems that the area below is extremely vast. Your lordship is indeed extraordinary. You can actually penetrate the boundary of the headquarters and sense the situation underground. Bert Zeely exclaimed in admiration. He knew how many concealing boundaries covered the Calamity Church's headquarters underground. Although the people of the Church of Light knew that this was the headquarters of the Calamity Church, they didn't know its specific location. There were also experts who had secretly come over to investigate but were unable to grasp the key points. Who would have thought that Han Shuo would be able to immediately sense the situation underground the first time he came here? This made him really admire Han Shuo. Han Shuo smiled faintly and closed his eyes to gradually sense the area. He was startled and blurted out, There are actually thousands of people underground, and they occupy such a vast area. No wonder they could contend against the Church of Light for so many years without falling. Your lordship is amazing. Seeing that Han Shuo had blurted out the number of people underground, even though they were separated by layers upon layers of boundaries, Wolf was also very astonished. Oh, some people are coming up. Their strength isn't weak either. Han Shuo's consciousness sensed a group of people coming up from a depth of 100 meters. He knew that the Calamity Church must have a special method to spy on the situation above. Among the people who came up, there was actually a powerful base god and a demigod. It must be an elder who has come up to receive us. Some of the things your lordship has done over the years are really too sensational. Although your lordship has never come to the headquarters, many youngsters in the headquarters have already viewed your lordship as their idol. God knows how much they worship your lordship. Bert Zeely exclaimed in heartfelt admiration. His tone was sincere, as though he was one of them. As Bert Zeely fawningly explained, a rumbling tremor sounded from beneath the three's feet. A kind of energy came from underground, and the sand grains of a sand dune in front of the three suddenly flowed outwards. In the blink of an eye, all the sand grains that made up the sand dune had flowed away, and an elevator that could accommodate 10 people floated up from underground. A fat man with an exceedingly large physique, who looked like a mountain of flesh, occupied more than half the space on the elevator. His small eyes sparkled as he looked at the three with a beaming smile. Han Shuo sensed a formidable energy of destruction from this fatty. With just a glance, Han Shuo was certain that this fatty was a powerful base god who cultivated in the Edict of Destruction. Behind the big fatty was a skinny old man who looked like a ghoul. His body was covered in the element of darkness. Han Shuo knew that he was the demigod that his consciousness had sensed just now. We pay our respects to your holiness. Han Shuo didn't move. Wolf and Bert Zeely suddenly knelt down on one knee and respectfully saluted. Han Shuo was also stunned. He didn't expect that the Pope of the Calamity Church would personally come up to receive him. It seemed that the Calamity Church had indeed attached great importance to him. Chapter 628. Get up, get up. The mountain of flesh fatty nodded at the two with a beaming smile, then walked down the elevator enthusiastically. He laughed heartily and said to Han Shuo, Brian, you've finally returned. We've been waiting for this day for almost 10 years. The fatty was extremely cordial. It was the first time they had met, but he acted as if he had known Han Shuo for a long time. He didn't have the slightest bit of restraint that a stranger should have. This caught Han Shuo by surprise. Han Shuo was no ordinary person either. He also said with a grin, I've always been hunted down in the past few years. Then, I was framed by the Church of Light and suffered a despicable sneak attack. That's why I haven't had the time. See, I've only just returned, and now I'm here. Haha, heroes indeed come from the youth. Ever since the day I took this position, I've always wanted to get rid of those 3 old geezers from the Church of Light. Hundreds of years have passed, but I've never been able to realize that dream. Who would have thought that you would accomplish the goal we've always wanted to achieve in just a few short decades? How can I not be convinced of my old age? He smiled as he walked in front of Han Shuo. He was like a mountain of flesh pressing down on Han Shuo, casting a large shadow under the scorching sun. Then, our goals are the same, Han Shuo said with a smile. Of course, we're on the same side. We've been since the beginning. The fatty emphasized, defining the positions of both sides. Han Shuo smiled but didn't say anything. He had never thought of himself as a member of the Calamity Church, but because of the skeletal staff, the Calamity Church had long since acknowledged him. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Come, let's go down. This is your first time coming to the headquarters, so let someone accompany you for a stroll. You must be tired after walking all the way here in the desert. Take a bath and rest first. If there's anything else, we'll talk after you're comfortable. The Calamity Pope chuckled as he led Brian to the elevator. He raised his voice and instructed someone above. Belinda, you and Brian can be considered old acquaintances. I'll leave this matter to you. Serve Brian well for me. Understood. Your Holiness. The young girl who came up with the fat man replied respectfully. Oval cheeks, high-nosed bridge, rosy lips, slender crescent-shaped eyebrows, a pair of sapphire-like starry eyes, fair and smooth skin, and a graceful figure. These were all characteristics that a beauty should have. It was just that the greenish-black birthmark on her left cheek was too conspicuous and ruined her overall beauty. This was Belinda, the first member of the Calamity Church that Han Shuo had met back then. After so many years, Han Shuo felt a bit sad when he saw this female alchemist with regrets again. He still remembered the first time he'd met Belinda and how he'd been shocked by the golem she'd conjured. He also remembered the many things that had happened between them. Belinda appeared to be in fear and trepidation as she looked at the current Han Shuo. Back then, she had tried to kill Han Shuo and had also been captured by Han Shuo. This time, Han Shuo had become someone that she couldn't afford to offend. This made her a little worried that Han Shuo would hold a grudge and purposefully deal with her. Beside Belinda, Dark Grand Magus Edwin also looked at Han Shuo with a smile. His smile seemed to be fawning as he bowed and said sincerely, Lord Brian, Belinda and I will first show you around the headquarters. Just like Belinda, Edwin was the first expert of the Calamity Church that Han Shuo had come into contact with. This Dark Grand Magus had once pursued Han Shuo with all his might in the Valley of Sunshine, and had also been cursed by Han Shuo with vicious words. Now that they met in the headquarters of the Calamity Church, the three's identities had completely changed. One couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Han Shuo nodded with a smile as he looked at these two old friends that he hadn't seen for many years. Long time no see. Long time no see. Hehe. I thought that my lordship would forget small characters like us. Edwin chuckled, his smile a little bitter. How could that be? Han Shuo smiled faintly. You two are the first members of the Calamity Church that I've met. Hehe. It won't be that easy to forget. Edwin, it's your honor to serve Brian well. Do you understand? The ghoulish-looking old man who cultivated in the elemental energy of darkness instructed Edwin in a dark tone. He had the strength of a demigod, and Edwin was startled by his glare. Understood, Master. Edwin hastily responded. Brian, please come inside. Make yourself at home. You belong here to begin with. The emaciated old man chuckled dryly after berating Edwin, and respectfully turned his body to the side, indicating for Han Shuo to walk in. Seeing Edwin's master's respectful attitude towards him, Han Shuo nodded with a smile as he walked over, saying, You're too kind. Accompanied by the Calamity Church's Pope, Han Shuo followed behind them. They used the elevator to slowly descend to the underground of the Calamity Church. Han Shuo used his consciousness to sense the wondrous power of the boundary around him as he sized up the surroundings with his eyes. This place was built hundreds of years ago, when the church was at its lowest point of decline. The Church of Light led all the nations on the profound continent to besiege us. Our people were like stray dogs hiding from place to place, forced to settle down here with no other choice. We've stayed here for hundreds of years, and have yet to truly walk out of this place. Hee, but with you around, I believe that day won't be too far off. As the master of the skeletal staff, you are indeed the hope of our church. As they descended, the Pope began to explain the history of this place to Han Shuo in a pleasant manner, emphasizing the vile state of this place. The Church of Light's reputation has greatly declined, and its influence on the profound continent is on the decline. Apart from that so-called saintess on the sacred mountain, there shouldn't be any other experts they can bring out. I think they'll be finished before long. Han Shuo was unruffled as he conversed with the Pope. His expression was relaxed and natural, as though they were two old friends talking about a parent. Yes, it's all thanks to you. The big fatty tactfully complimented Han Shuo. As the Pope of the Calamity Church, this big fatty's conduct was extraordinary, and his words were very measured. You're too kind. Han Shuo was very modest and didn't claim any credit. Amidst the cheerful conversation, Han Shuo and the Pope descended 100 meters underground through an elevator and stopped at the entrance of a majestic underground palace. The big fatty didn't keep Han Shuo chatting after arriving here. He smilingly said, "All right, let Edwin and Belinda accompany you to familiarize yourself with this place. I'll inform the elders of your arrival. When you're well rested, we'll talk business tomorrow." Very well. Han Shuo nodded. He didn't mind this arrangement at all. This was the headquarters of the Calamity Church. Under the coverage of Han Shuo's consciousness, he already had a rough idea of the scale of the place. Even the distribution of personnel was very clear to him through his consciousness. Other than the fact that he hadn't actually looked around, Han Shuo had a general understanding of this place. After the Pope and the skinny old man left, Wolf and Bert Zeely also left. They probably went to report to the big fatty about what had happened outside. After these people had all disappeared, Edwin and Belinda's expressions became somewhat reserved. They looked at Han Shuo with somewhat fearful and uneasy gazes. Their hearts were perturbed, as though they didn't know how to face Han Shuo. If it was in the past, the two of them naturally wouldn't be so reserved when they saw Han Shuo. It was just that the difference in status and identity between the two parties was just too great. They had no choice but to be cautious. That, Lord Brian, where would you like to go first? Edwin smiled embarrassedly, looking at Han Shuo with a complicated expression. Han Shuo could see the nervousness in Edwin's heart with a single glance. He knew that Edwin was worried that Han Shuo would still remember the hatred from back then and act against him. Belinda was the same. She didn't dare to look Han Shuo in the eye. Over the years, she had inevitably heard of Han Shuo's great achievements in the church. Watching Han Shuo walk step by step towards glory and the pinnacle, she felt very sour in her heart. There's no need for the two of you to be so wary of me, right? No matter what, we can be considered old acquaintances. What happened back then wasn't a big deal. Moreover, I didn't suffer any losses. What are you afraid of? Han Shuo chuckled and asked. The two smiled wryly when they heard Han Shuo's words. Edwin bowed respectfully to Han Shuo again and said sincerely, "Lord Brian, we were indeed in the wrong in the past, but we didn't dare to harbor any more thoughts after learning that you had the skeletal staff. The Radiant Church and I are mortal enemies. That Ferguson that you killed has a blood feud with me. After you killed Ferguson, I was very grateful to you. After hearing about how you killed the experts of the Radiant Church one by one, we were truly grateful to you. If you want to pursue the matter of that year, we won't say anything. You are the hope of the church, someone that even the Pope must personally welcome. We naturally won't resist you, nor can we. You can do whatever you want." Belinda said softly. She was like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered, waiting for Han Shuo's punishment. Han Shuo couldn't help but laugh. He shook his head and said with a smile, "I've long forgotten about those small matters. I didn't think that you would still remember them, and remember them so deeply. Don't worry, with my current status and strength, I won't make trouble for you over such small matters. You're worrying too much." The two were overjoyed when they heard Han Shuo's words. They looked closely at Han Shuo and heaved a sigh of relief when they discovered that Han Shuo didn't seem to be joking. They hastily expressed their gratitude. "Thank you, my lord. Thank you, my lord. Let's go. Show me around. This is my first time visiting the Calamity Church, and I'm indeed a bit curious," Han Shuo said with a smile, using these words to dispel the two's nervousness. Whether it was Han Shuo, Edwin, or Belinda, they all knew that due to the great disparity between their statuses, their attitudes were obviously different. The two who had once acted high and mighty in front of Han Shuo now wore fawning smiles on their faces as they explained the situation in detail to Han Shuo, as though they were afraid that anything inappropriate would cause Han Shuo to be displeased. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.